The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy and destiny. But what happens when something arrives that exists outside that ancient pattern? What happens when power that owes nothing to midichlorians or the cosmic balance crashes into a universe that has never seen its like? The answer would come with lightning and fury, heralded by storms that defied all natural law. The sky above Lothal's capital city split open without warning. No ship emerged from hyperspace. No battle scarred the upper atmosphere. Instead, reality itself seemed to tear, a jagged wound of crackling energy that hung in the air like a scar across the fabric of space. Imperial sensors screamed alerts across every channel as atmospheric readings went haywire. Barometric pressure dropped impossibly fast. Temperature fluctuations created thermal columns that shattered wind patterns. And through it all, lightning that wasn't lightning arced in colors that shouldn't exist. Then she fell. Aurora Monroe plummeted through alien clouds, her white hair streaming behind her like a banner of silver, her body wreathed in electricity that danced across her dark skin. One moment she'd been in the X-Mansion's Cerebro chamber, her powers amplified to track a global weather anomaly. The next, Professor Xavier's machine had surged with feedback, reality had twisted, and she'd felt herself pulled through a tunnel of screaming cosmic forces into this. Her instincts kicked in before conscious thought. Wind answered her desperation, catching her fall and transforming her plummet into flight. Storm spread her arms wide, feeling air currents she'd never encountered before, thin, dusty, tainted with industrial pollutants and the acrid bite of starship fuel. Below her stretched a city of gray towers and grimy streets, a massive communications tower dominating the skyline. Beyond the urban sprawl, she could see grasslands that looked wrong, stripped and dying, dotted with massive Imperial excavation sites. This wasn't Earth. This wasn't anywhere she recognized. What have you done to this world? The words escaped her lips in a whisper, but the sky heard. Clouds began gathering above her, drawn by her distress and confusion. Thunder rumbled in response to her pounding heart. On the ground, Imperial officers stared upward in shock. Stormtroopers raised their blasters toward the impossible figure hovering in midair. And in the governor's tower, alarms shrieked as sensors detected energy readings that matched nothing in Imperial databases, power that registered similar to Force abilities but fundamentally alien in signature. Storm descended slowly, wind carrying her toward a less populated area on the city's outskirts. She needed information. She needed to understand where she was and how to get home. Her X-Men training kept her focused despite the fear clawing at her chest. She'd faced the Brood, traveled to the Shi'ar Empire, survived the impossible before. This was just another mission. Another challenge. She touched down in an abandoned plaza, her bare feet finding purchase on strange duracrete that felt wrong against her soles. The architecture was all harsh angles and Imperial efficiency, but the style was completely foreign. No human city she knew looked like this. And the people rushing past in the distance, they wore clothes she'd never seen, carried technology that hummed with unfamiliar energy signatures. A child stopped at the plaza's edge, staring at Storm with wide eyes. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, her clothes patched and worn, her face smudged with ash from the factories that belched smoke in the distance. She looked at Storm with an expression that made Aurora's heart clench, not fear, but recognition. Wonder. Hope. "Are you one of the Jedi?" the child whispered. "Have you come back?" Before Storm could respond, the shriek of engines cut through the air. 3 Imperial speeders screamed into the plaza, surrounding her position. Stormtroopers poured out, weapons trained on her from every angle. An officer stepped forward, his gray uniform pristine, his voice amplified by a comlink. "Unidentified Force sensitive. You are in violation of Imperial law. Surrender immediately or we will open fire." Storm raised her hands slowly, not in surrender but in warning. Lightning crackled between her fingers, not the manufactured electricity of human technology, but the primal fury of the storm itself. The air around her ionized, making every trooper's hair stand on end beneath their helmets. "I don't know what a force sensitive is," Storm said, her voice carrying the regal authority she'd learned in her years as an X-Man and leader. "But I am no one's prisoner. I seek only information and passage. Let me speak to whoever governs this world, and there need be no conflict." The officer's hand moved toward his weapon. That was answer enough. Storm's eyes rolled white as her consciousness expanded outward, touching the vast atmospheric systems of this alien world. She felt the planet's pain, ecosystems disrupted, weather patterns broken by industrial exploitation, the very air crying out from abuse. And she felt her power respond with righteous fury. The sky answered her rage. Clouds boiled into existence above the plaza, black and pregnant with barely contained violence. Wind howled through the streets with hurricane force, sending speeders skidding sideways. Lightning, true lightning born of atmospheric fury, struck the ground between Storm and the troopers, the thunderclap so loud it shattered windows in nearby buildings. "I said there need be no conflict." Storm's voice rose with the wind, amplified by the tempest itself. "But if you force my hand, you will learn why my people once called me goddess." The stormtroopers opened fire. Blaster bolts, not bullets, Storm noted with alarm, but coherent energy beams, lanced toward her position. She twisted in the air, wind carrying her aside as the bolts passed through empty space. More lightning struck, precisely targeted, frying weapons without killing the soldiers who held them. She wouldn't murder these people, not until she understood what conflict she'd stumbled into. But the Empire had different rules. The officer barked an order, and one of the troopers raised a larger weapon. Storm recognized a rocket launcher when she saw one, regardless of its alien design. The missile streaked toward her, and she had only seconds to react. Wind wouldn't stop an explosive. Lightning might detonate it prematurely, but not safely. Storm pulled moisture from the air itself, flash freezing it into a wall of ice 3 feet thick. The missile struck the barrier and exploded, the blast wave washing over her but the shrapnel contained. As the ice shattered into glittering shards, Storm rose higher into the air, her tempest growing with her fury. Enough. Her voice was thunder itself. "I will not be caged by men who poison worlds." The storm she unleashed was surgical despite its fury, wind that disarmed but didn't kill, lightning that disabled vehicles but spared lives, rain that became a blinding curtain forcing the Imperials to retreat. And through it all, Storm flew higher, needing distance and perspective. From above the city, she could see the full scope of the devastation. This world, Lothal, she'd heard the officer say, was dying. Strip mines scarred the grasslands. Factories belched poison into the sky. And everywhere, the same gray-armored soldiers enforcing order through fear. It reminded her too much of humanity's worst impulses. Of the Sentinels hunting mutants. Of government forces turning against their own people. And in that moment, Aurora Monroe understood that whatever galaxy she'd fallen into, the fight was depressingly familiar. Those with power exploiting those without. The strong crushing the weak. The powerful few destroying worlds for profit. She'd spent her life fighting that battle. It seemed she would fight it here too, at least until she found a way home. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. Below her, Imperial reinforcements were already scrambling. Above her, the clouds she'd summoned still churned with barely contained fury. And somewhere in this strange galaxy, people with abilities similar to hers, these Jedi, the child had mentioned, were apparently hunted and destroyed. Storm had been worshipped as a goddess. She'd led the X-Men. She'd faced cosmic threats and emerged victorious. But this? This was something entirely new. The wind carried her east, away from the city, toward the grasslands where she'd seen settlements that looked less industrial, more organic. She needed allies. She needed information. She needed to understand this galaxy's rules before she could break them. And break them she would, if necessary. Because if there was one thing Aurora Monroe had never tolerated, it was tyranny. The storm followed her like a cloak of power, announcing to every sensor on Lothal that something unprecedented had arrived. Something the Empire couldn't classify, couldn't predict, and couldn't easily control. In the governor's tower, frantic reports were already being compiled. And light years away, in the heart of Imperial Center, those reports would soon reach someone far more dangerous than mere officers and stormtroopers. They would reach the Inquisitorius. And eventually, they would reach Darth Vader himself. But Storm didn't know that yet. She knew only that she was far from home, surrounded by enemies she didn't understand, on a world crying out for help she might not be able to provide. The X-Man flew into the unknown, lightning dancing in her wake, searching for answers in a galaxy that had never seen her kind of power. And behind her, in that abandoned plaza, a little girl watched the storm goddess disappear into the clouds and felt something she hadn't felt in years of Imperial occupation. Hope. The Inquisitor felt it before his ship even broke atmosphere. A disturbance. Not in the Force, not exactly, but something that created ripples similar enough to demand investigation. The fifth brother stood on the bridge of his transport, his gray skin pale in the viewport's light, his eyes fixed on the planet below. Lothal. A nothing world, barely worth the Empire's attention except for its mineral deposits and strategic position. Yet now it radiated with energy that made his teeth ache and his connection to the dark side writhe with confusion. Report, he growled to the officer beside him. My lord, the disturbance originated 3 hours ago in Capital City. Atmospheric manipulation on a massive scale, artificial storm generation, precise lightning strikes, localized temperature control. Imperial forces engaged an unidentified humanoid female displaying abilities consistent with Force usage. She escaped after disabling an entire garrison without casualties. The fifth brother's lips curled. Without casualties? Then she's weak. Sentimental. We'll break her easily. My lord, there's more. The officer's voice wavered. Our sensors indicate her power signature doesn't match any known Force-sensitive profile. And Governor Price reports she claimed not to know what a Force-sensitive was. That gave the Inquisitor pause. Impossible. Everyone in the galaxy knew of the Force, even if they didn't believe in it. The Jedi had been legend for a generation, their influence stretching back millennia. For someone to display such power and claim ignorance? Either she was lying, or... The fifth brother didn't like implications he couldn't immediately explain. Where is she now? Long-range scans tracked her to the eastern grasslands, near the settlement of Kothal. She's been stationary for 2 hours. Prepare a strike team. We take her alive if possible. The Grand Inquisitor will want to question her personally. The fifth brother ignited his double-bladed lightsaber, spinning it in a practiced flourish. But if she resists, we remind her why the Jedi fell. Storm sat cross-legged on a flat rock overlooking Kothal, her mind still reeling from everything she'd learned in the past 2 hours. The refugees had been wary at first, strangers appeared rarely in these parts, and when they did, they usually wore Imperial uniforms. But Storm's display of power, her obvious lack of weapons or armor, and most importantly, the way she'd asked questions rather than given orders, had eventually won cautious cooperation. The old farmer, Morad, had been the most helpful. He'd explained the basics, the Galactic Empire, the destroyed Jedi Order, the Rebel Alliance fighting from the shadows. He'd described the Force in terms that made Storm's scientific mind rebel, mystical energy, midichlorians, light and dark sides. It sounded like religion mixed with pseudoscience, yet she couldn't deny that people here demonstrably moved objects with their minds, saw the future, and wielded laser swords that defied physics. You're not from the core worlds, Morad had said, studying her face. Not from the outer rim either. Your clothes, your speech, where exactly are you from? Storm had chosen honesty. Another universe entirely, if I understand what happened to me. I'm a mutant, someone born with genetic differences that grant abilities. Where I come from, we're hunted by machines called Sentinels. Here, it seems you have Inquisitors instead. The old man had gone very quiet. The Inquisitors kill anyone with Force abilities who didn't die with the Jedi. They serve the Emperor's will. And if they sensed you in the city, he'd shaken his head. You should run. Far and fast. But Storm hadn't survived this long by running. The X-Men stood and fought. They protected those who couldn't protect themselves. And everything she'd seen of the Empire in just a few hours told her they were no different from the worst of humanity's hate groups, just better armed and galaxy-spanning. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a scent that made her tense. Ozone. Heated metal. And something else, a presence that felt like oil sliding across her consciousness. Not telepathy, but something similar. Something that wanted to find her. Storm stood, her eyes already beginning to glow white as she reached out to the atmosphere. Dark clouds gathered overhead with unnatural speed, responding to her will. Lightning flickered in their depths, eager and hungry. The Imperial transport screamed overhead, repulsors howling as it descended toward the grasslands. Storm watched it land 200 meters away, her body beginning to levitate as wind currents lifted her. She wouldn't let this fight reach the village. Whatever came next, it would happen here, away from civilians. The transport's ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss. Stormtroopers poured out first, 20 of them, forming a perimeter with military precision. Then came the Inquisitor. Storm had seen many things in her years as an X-Men, aliens, demons, gods. But the fifth brother was something uniquely unsettling. He moved with predatory grace, his red-bladed lightsaber spinning lazily in one massive hand. His eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl, not with fear, but with recognition. This was someone who enjoyed causing pain. You are the anomaly, the fifth brother called out, his voice carrying easily across the grassland. The one who attacked Imperial forces in the city. Surrender now, and the Emperor may show mercy. Storm descended slowly, her feet touching grass that bent away from the electricity crackling across her skin. I attacked no one who did not attack me first. I seek only information and a way to return home. Allow me to leave peacefully, and we need not be enemies. The Inquisitor laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You display Force abilities without training, without the taint of the Jedi's corruption. You are a weapon waiting to be claimed. The Empire will have you, one way or another. I am No.1's weapon. Storm's voice dropped to dangerous calm. I have been enslaved before. I have been used. Never again. Then you choose pain. The fifth brother raised his lightsaber. Kill her if necessary. But I prefer her alive and broken. The stormtroopers opened fire. Storm didn't move, didn't need to. Wind became a wall, deflecting blaster bolts into the ground and sky. One bolt ricocheted directly back at the trooper who'd fired it, striking his shoulder and spinning him to the ground. Storm winced at that, but she couldn't afford to hold back completely. The Inquisitor moved with shocking speed, force enhancing his leap to clear the distance between them in a single bound. His lightsaber descended in a deadly arc aimed at her neck. Storm met him with lightning. The bolt that erupted from her hands was pure atmospheric fury, millions of volts channeled through her body and released with surgical precision. It struck the fifth brother's lightsaber first, and for a moment the blade flickered and sparked as energy overloaded the weapon systems. Then the current found the Inquisitor himself, and he screamed, a sound of shocked agony rather than mortal injury. He fell back, smoking, his lightsaber shorting out. Storm pressed her advantage, summoning wind that lifted the Inquisitor off his feet and slammed him into his transport's hull hard enough to dent the metal. But he recovered with frightening speed, using that Force ability to cushion the impact and land in a crouch. Impressive, he growled, and Storm heard genuine respect beneath the rage. But lightning is the dark side's weapon. You cannot match what you don't understand. His hands extended, and Storm felt something try to grip her throat, invisible fingers of malevolent will attempting to crush her windpipe. She'd experienced telepathic attacks before, fought off mental control from masters like Mastermind and Shadow King. This was similar but different, less subtle, more brutally direct. Storm reached into herself, into the core of her being where her mutation resided, and rejected the attack with sheer force of will. "You're not the first to try to control me with your mind," she said, her voice strained but defiant. "And you won't be the last to fail." The fifth brother's eyes widened, genuine surprise. Then he snarled and hurled his lightsaber like a boomerang, the blade spinning toward Storm in a deadly arc that no wind could fully deflect. She dove aside, feeling the weapon's heat sear past her shoulder. It circled back to the Inquisitor's hand with unnatural precision, clearly guided by his will. This was a problem. Storm's powers were devastating against conventional forces, but this man could manipulate objects without touching them, see attacks coming before they landed, and moved with speed that suggested superhuman enhancement. He was like a combination of Magneto's telekinesis and Wolverine's combat skills, wrapped in religious zealotry. She needed to change the battlefield. Storm's eyes blazed pure white as she reached up into the storm clouds she'd summoned. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Moisture in the air crystallized instantly, forming ice that swirled around her in a protective barrier. Then she pulled, really pulled, drawing every water molecule from the surrounding atmosphere. Rain began falling. Not ordinary rain, but a deluge of biblical proportions, visibility dropping to near zero within seconds. The stormtroopers stumbled, blind, their helmet sensors overwhelmed by the water and electromagnetic interference from constant lightning strikes. Through the rain, Storm flew at the Inquisitor, ice forming around her fists in jagged spikes. She struck at him with the combat skills Wolverine had taught her, each blow potentially lethal if it landed. The fifth brother parried with his lightsaber, the blade hissing as it vaporized ice, but Storm was relentless. She'd fought Sentinels programmed to kill mutants. She'd battled aliens and demons. She would not fall to one more tyrant with delusions of righteousness. "You fight like a warrior," the Inquisitor admitted, blocking another strike. "But you lack discipline. Training. The dark side would make you unstoppable." "I've heard that song before," Storm spat back. "From men who promised power and delivered only chains." She released him, shooting backward on a column of wind, and called down lightning with both hands. Not one bolt, but a dozen, a storm of electrical fury that turned the grassland into a hellscape of thunder and light. The Inquisitor threw up his hand, and Storm felt that force power deflecting some of the strikes, but even he couldn't stop them all. Lightning earthed through the transport, through the stumbling troopers, through the Inquisitor himself. When the barrage ended, the fifth brother was on one knee, his robe smoking, his lightsaber flickering uncertainly. But he was still conscious. Still dangerous. "You should have run," he growled. "Now the entire Empire will hunt you. Vader himself will come." Storm prepared another attack, but movement in her peripheral vision made her hesitate. The stormtroopers, the ones still conscious, were retreating toward their transport. And in the distance, she could see villagers from Kothal emerging from their homes, watching the battle with a mixture of terror and awe. She'd made her point. Further violence would only endanger innocents. "Tell your Empire this," Storm said, her voice carrying over the dying rain. "I am Aurora Monroe of the X-Men. I seek no war with you, but I will not bow to tyrants. Leave me in peace, and I'll do the same. Continue hunting me, and you'll learn that storms can be far more destructive than you imagine." The fifth brother laughed despite his injuries. "You don't understand. The Emperor suffers no rivals. Your power makes you a threat to his order. There is no peace for you here. Only submission or death." He force-pulled himself back toward the transport, moving with wounded dignity. His remaining troops scrambled aboard, and the ship lifted off with screaming repulsors, limping back toward the city. Storm watched them go, her heart heavy. She tried to avoid this. Tried to find peaceful answers. But this galaxy seemed determined to force her into conflict she hadn't asked for. Behind her, Morid approached cautiously. That was an Inquisitor. They report directly to Vader. He'll come now, you know. And nothing stops Vader. Then I'll face him when he arrives, Storm said quietly. But I won't run. Not from him. Not from anyone. The old farmer shook his head sadly. You really are like the Jedi. Brave. Powerful. Doomed. Storm turned to face him, rain still dripping from her hair. The Jedi fell because they were unprepared. I've been fighting extinction my entire life. This empire will find me far harder to kill than they expect. In the sky above, the storm she'd summoned began to disperse. But Storm could feel it lingering at the edges of her consciousness, ready to return at her call. This world's atmosphere was rich, responsive, eager even. She could work with this. And if this Vader came hunting her, he'd learn what it meant to face the fury of the elements themselves. The message reached the rebel cell on Lothal's moon within 6 hours. Hera Syndulla studied the holographic footage for the third time, her leku twitching with a mixture of fascination and concern. The recording, smuggled out by a sympathetic Imperial technician, showed a woman hovering in midair, lightning dancing between her fingers, wind obeying her commands like trained pets. The Inquisitor's attack. The devastating counterassault. The surgical precision that disabled Imperial forces without slaughtering them wholesale. Play it again, Canon Jarrus said quietly. The former Jedi stood behind Hera, his hand resting unconsciously on the lightsaber hidden beneath his jacket. His face was troubled. Hera complied. They watched Storm face down the fifth brother, watched her reject his force choke through sheer willpower, watched her turn the grasslands into a tempest that even an Inquisitor couldn't overcome. She's not trained, Canon said finally. No lightsaber forms, no classical force techniques. But that power, he shook his head. I've never felt anything like it, even before the purge. It's like she's touching the force, but from outside it somehow. Does that make sense? Nothing about this makes sense, Sabine Wren interjected, the young Mandalorian adjusting her armor as she studied the image. According to Imperial reports, she appeared out of nowhere. No ship, no hyperspace signature. Just tore through the sky like reality broke open. Zeb grunted from his position by the door. So what? Another Force user the Empire wants dead. Not our problem. It becomes our problem when she starts interfering with Imperial operations, Hera countered. The governor has diverted resources to hunt her. That creates opportunities we can exploit. And if she's as powerful as this footage suggests. You want to recruit her. Canon's tone was flat. I want to talk to her, Hera corrected. Find out who she is, what she wants, whether she's a potential ally or another threat we need to worry about. The Empire's already scrambling. We should move before they do. Canon was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. I'll go. If she really doesn't understand the Force, she'll need guidance. And if she's hostile, his hand drifted to his lightsaber again. I'll handle it. We all go, Hera said firmly. If she is an ally, we'll need to show strength and trust. And if she's not, well, we've faced worse odds. Sabine grinned beneath her helmet. Besides, I want to see this storm goddess up close. The refugees are already calling her that, you know. Whispering that the Jedi have returned, that the Force has sent them a champion. That kind of talk gets people killed, Canon muttered. But Hera could see the hope flickering behind his eyes despite his caution. The hope that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone as they'd thought. Storm found the rebel cell before they found her. She'd been tracking their communications for 2 days, using her heightened senses and the atmospheric disturbances their ship created to pinpoint their base. It hadn't been difficult. She'd infiltrated more secure facilities than an abandoned Republic outpost on Lothal's moon. The X-Men had trained her well in reconnaissance. Now she stood in the shadow of their modified VCX-100 freighter, invisible behind a curtain of fog she'd summoned to mask her approach. She watched them prepare for departure through the viewports, studied their movements and interactions. A Twi'lek woman who moved with military precision, the leader. A human male who carried himself like someone hiding something important. A young woman in distinctive armor covered in artwork. A large, powerful creature she couldn't immediately classify. They were preparing to find her. That saved time. Storm dispersed the fog and stepped into the open, 50 meters from their ship. Then she called the wind, lifting herself into the air where they couldn't help but see her. Lightning flickered around her form, not threatening, just visible. A declaration of presence. The ship's ramp was already lowering. They'd detected her approach somehow. The crew emerged with weapons drawn but not aimed, a careful balance between caution and non-aggression that Storm appreciated. The human male stepped forward first, and Storm felt that strange pressure again, the Force, they called it. He was reaching toward her with it, trying to sense her intentions. She let him, projecting calm and openness. She had nothing to hide from these people. "I am Aurora Monroe," Storm called out, descending slowly until her feet touched the lunar regolith. The lack of atmosphere here was uncomfortable but manageable. She'd created a thin bubble of pressurized air around herself, drawing what little oxygen existed on this moon. "I believe you've been looking for me. I've saved you the trouble." The Twi'lek woman stepped forward, holstering her blaster in a gesture of good faith. "I'm Hera Syndulla, captain of the Ghost. This is my crew, Kanan, Sabine, Zeb. We're part of the Rebel Alliance." "The people fighting the Empire," Storm said. "Yes, I've learned about you." The old farmer, Morid, spoke highly of your efforts. Kanan's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've been asking questions about us." "Why?" "Because I don't ally myself blindly," Storm replied. "Where I come from, governments and militaries often claim noble intentions while perpetrating atrocities. I needed to understand who you are before approaching you." "And what did you conclude?" Hera asked. Storm studied them for a moment. She'd spent 2 days listening to refugee stories, piecing together the history of the Empire's rise and the rebellion's desperate resistance. She'd learned about Alderaan's destruction, an entire planet murdered to make a political point. She'd heard about Wookiee slaves, strip-mined worlds, brutal suppressions of peaceful protests. And she'd also learned about the rebellion's attacks on military targets, their evacuation of civilians before strikes, their refusal to become the monsters they fought. It reminded her of the X-Men's philosophy. Of Professor Xavier's dream. Fight the good fight, but never lose your humanity in the process. "I concluded that you're the closest thing this galaxy has to heroes," Storm said simply. "Imperfect, under-resourced, fighting impossible odds. But fighting nonetheless." Sabine lowered her weapons entirely. "Then you want to join us?" "I want to understand the situation more completely before making that commitment," Storm corrected. "I'm not from your galaxy. I was pulled here by accident, and my primary goal is finding a way home. But while I'm here," she gestured toward Lothal hanging in the sky above them. "I won't stand idle while tyrants destroy worlds and hunt people for the crime of being different." Kanan took a step closer, his expression intense. "The Inquisitor reported that you claimed not to know what a Force-sensitive is. Was that true?" "It was. Until 2 days ago, I'd never heard the term. Where I come from, my abilities are the result of genetic mutation, a natural evolutionary variance that grants some humans extraordinary capabilities. We're called mutants, and we're hunted by machines called Sentinels, built by fearful governments to exterminate us." The Ghost's crew exchanged glances. Hera spoke carefully. Your abilities, they seem similar to the Force. Telekinesis, lightning, prescience. I have none of those things, Storm interrupted. I manipulate weather and atmospheric conditions through a biological connection to Earth's, to any planet's, electromagnetic field and ecosystem. I sense and control air pressure, temperature, humidity, wind currents. I don't move objects with my mind or see the future. I'm not psychic or mystical. I'm a mutant with very specific powers. Kanan's hand finally left his lightsaber. But the fifth brother felt you through the Force. You registered as powerful. Perhaps because my abilities create similar effects, Storm suggested. Or perhaps because your Force is simply another name for natural phenomena you don't fully understand. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, despite my friend Hank's best efforts to educate me. Zeb snorted. So you're saying you do all that, he gestured vaguely toward the sky, without any mystical energy? Just mutation. Just mutation, Storm confirmed. Though there's nothing just about it. My powers are as fundamental to who I am as your lungs or heart. Hera stepped even closer now, her expression thoughtful. You disabled an entire Imperial garrison and fought off an Inquisitor without killing anyone. That takes incredible control. I was raised by a man who taught me that with great power comes great responsibility, Storm said, thinking of Professor Xavier. I've killed when necessary to protect innocence. But I don't kill casually, and I don't enjoy it. The Empire won't give you that choice, Kanan warned. The next time they come for you, they'll send overwhelming force. Possibly Vader himself. Storm met his eyes steadily. Then I'll face Vader. I've faced gods and monsters before. One more tyrant won't break me. Sabine actually laughed at that. I like her. The question is, Hera said, what do you want from us? You said you're not ready to join the rebellion. So why reveal yourself? Storm took a breath, considering her words carefully. I need information about this galaxy. Technology, politics, the nature of this force that everyone keeps mentioning. I need to understand where I am and how I might get home. In exchange, I can offer my abilities, limited though they are by my principles, to help your cause while I'm here. Limited how? Kanan asked. I won't assassinate political targets, no matter how evil. I won't attack civilian infrastructure, even if it weakens the Empire. I won't become a weapon pointed at whatever target you choose. Storm's voice hardened. I've been used before, manipulated by people who claim to fight for justice. I won't repeat those mistakes. Hera nodded slowly. Those are reasonable boundaries. And honestly, we could use someone with your abilities. The Empire is tightening its grip on Lothal. Civilians are suffering. And if you can create storms that disable Imperial operations without bloodshed, she glanced at Kanan. That's exactly the kind of surgical strike capability we need. There's another factor, Kanan added quietly. The refugees are already calling you a goddess. They think you're a sign from the Force that the Empire can be beaten. That kind of hope is dangerous if you can't deliver on it. But if you work with us, coordinate your actions with our operations. We could start a real resistance movement on Lothal, Hera finished. Not just sabotage and hit-and-run attacks. Actual liberation efforts. Storm felt the weight of their expectations settling on her shoulders. It was familiar, the X-Men had carried that same burden. Every time they appeared in public, they represented all mutants. Every victory or failure shaped public perception of their entire species. I can't promise miracles, she said finally. I can't free this entire world alone. But I can help where it matters. Strategic disruption of Imperial operations. Protection of civilians. And if this Vader comes, her eyes began to glow white. I'll show him that some storms can't be weathered. Zeb grinned, showing impressive teeth. Oh, I definitely like her now. Hera extended her hand. Then we have an alliance. Temporary, conditional, but real. Welcome to the rebellion, Aurora Monroe. Even if you're not ready to fully commit yet. Storm took her hand, feeling the Twi'lek's firm grip. I prefer Storm. And thank you. I've been alone in this galaxy for 2 days. It's good to have allies again. Come aboard, Hera said, gesturing toward the ghost. We'll brief you on the situation, show you what we're up against, and start planning how to use your abilities most effectively. And maybe Canon can explain the Force in a way that makes sense to someone from another universe. I'll try, Canon said dryly. Though explaining the Force to someone who thinks it's just natural phenomena might be the hardest teaching assignment I've ever had. Storm smiled despite herself. I've had difficult teachers before. I'm sure I'll survive your instruction. As they walked toward the ghost, Sabine fell into step beside Storm. So, another universe, huh? What's it like? Do you have Jedi there? Sith? An empire? We have heroes and villains, Storm replied. Mutants and humans. Ancient evils and cosmic threats. And yes, we have empires, though none quite as vast as yours. But the fundamental struggle is the same. Good versus evil. Freedom versus tyranny. Hope versus despair. Sounds familiar, Sabine said. It does, doesn't it? Storm looked up at Lothal hanging in the void above them. Perhaps some battles transcend universes. Perhaps the fight for justice is truly universal. Behind them, Canon paused, feeling something in the Force shift. A convergence point, a moment of significance. This woman from another reality had just allied with the rebellion, however tentatively. And somehow, he knew that decision would ripple across the galaxy in ways none of them could yet imagine. The Empire had made a serious mistake when they'd attacked her first. They'd turned a potential neutral party into an active threat. And if the Fifth Brother's report was accurate, she was a threat unlike anything the Empire had faced since the Jedi Purge. Canon just hoped they could guide her power toward liberation rather than destruction. Because with abilities like hers, the line between hero and catastrophe could be dangerously thin. Governor Arinda Price stood before the holographic display in her office, watching the footage for what felt like the 100th time. The woman, this Storm, hovering above Kothal, electricity arcing from her hands, wind obeying her slightest gesture. The Fifth Brother, one of the Emperor's most effective hunters, driven to his knees by atmospheric fury. It was humiliating. Worse, it was expensive. How many? She asked without turning. Her aide consulted his datapad nervously. 12 AT-STs damaged beyond field repair. 23 speeder bikes destroyed. 47 stormtroopers requiring medical treatment for electrical burns and exposure injuries. The excavation site in Sector 7 was shut down for 18 hours due to the storm she summoned. Production losses exceed. I don't care about the credits, Price interrupted coldly. I care about control. Every hour this woman remains free, the locals grow bolder. They're already calling her a goddess, whispering that she's come to liberate them. How long before those whispers become open rebellion? Imperial intelligence suggests the rebel cell has made contact with her, the aide said carefully. Long-range sensors detected a VCX-100 freighter, the Ghost, landing briefly on Lothal's moon. Then departing with one additional heat signature aboard. Price finally turned, her expression glacial. She's joined them. It appears so, Governor. This was worse than she'd thought. A Force-sensitive, or whatever this woman truly was, allied with the rebellion on Lothal. The planet was already a headache with its smuggling networks and underground resistance. Adding someone who could level city blocks with weather manipulation would turn it into a full-scale disaster. What's the status of Imperial reinforcements? Admiral Constantine is bringing 3-star destroyers within the week. The Grand Inquisitor has been notified but is currently engaged hunting a Jedi Master in the Outer Rim. However, the aide hesitated. However what? Lord Vader has taken personal interest in the reports. His flagship, the Executor, is currently in the Corellian sector. If he decides to investigate personally. Price felt something cold settle in her stomach. Vader's attention was never a blessing. Officers who failed in his presence had a tendency to die of sudden respiratory failure. But if anyone could handle this storm woman, it would be the Emperor's enforcer. Has he issued any directives? Only one, Governor. Quote, continue standard suppression operations. If the target reveals herself, engage but do not commit excessive resources. I will handle this personally when I arrive. End quote. Price nodded slowly. That bought her time. Vader wouldn't arrive for at least a week, possibly longer if his current assignment ran long. That meant she had a window to either neutralize this threat herself, unlikely given the fifth brother's failure, or at least contain the damage until proper Imperial might could be brought to bear. Increase patrols in the eastern grasslands. I want surveillance on every settlement within 50 kilometers of Kothal. If she shows herself again, I want to know immediately. But instruct commanders to observe and report only. No engagement without my explicit authorization. Governor, the troops are demanding retaliation for. The troops will follow orders or find themselves reassigned to sanitation duty on Kessel, Price snapped. We're not dealing with a standard insurgent. This woman disabled an Inquisitor without killing him. That suggests either remarkable control or dangerous sentimentality. Either way, it's a weakness we can potentially exploit. She turned back to the holographic display, freezing it on Storm's face. Dark skin, white hair, eyes that glowed with unnatural power. Beautiful, regal, and utterly alien despite her human appearance. Find out everything about her, Price ordered. Where she came from, what she wants, any possible leverage we can use. If she joined the rebels, she has motivations beyond simple destruction. People with motivations can be manipulated. Or eliminated. The aide bowed and departed, leaving Price alone with her thoughts and the frozen image of Lothal's newest problem. She pulled up another file, reports from the mining operations. The Empire needed Lothal's resources. The factories were producing critical components for the war machine. Any disruption to that production directly impacted her standing with the Imperial hierarchy. This storm woman had already cost her dearly. When Vader arrived, Price would ensure he understood that. And if the Dark Lord eliminated this threat, well, Price would make certain she received appropriate credit for setting up that elimination. 300 kilometers away, Storm stood in the Ghost's common area, staring at the galactic map Hera had projected. Thousands upon thousands of star systems, all connected by these hyperspace lanes. The sheer scale of it made her head spin. This is just the known galaxy, Hera explained, gesturing at the hologram. There are unexplored regions beyond the outer rim, and whole sections we've lost contact with during the Imperial era. Conservative estimates put inhabitable worlds at over 1.5 million. Storm shook her head in wonder. My Earth has 7 billion people. This galaxy. Trillions, canon supplied. Maybe quadrillions if you count species the Empire doesn't officially recognize. It's impossible to know for certain anymore. The Republic used to keep better records. And the Empire controls most of this? Storm gestured at the red zones marking Imperial territory, which covered the vast majority of the displayed space. Controls, oppresses, exploits, Sabine said bitterly. Depends on the world. Core worlds like Coruscant get stability and order. Outer rim worlds like Lothal get stripped for resources and left to rot. Storm studied the map silently, her mind working through implications. The X-Men fought to protect mutants on one planet. These rebels were fighting an empire that spanned millions of worlds. The scale was incomprehensible. How do you win this? She asked quietly. How do you defeat something this vast? One system at a time, Hera replied. One liberated world, one successful mission, one inspired citizen who decides to resist. The Empire seems invincible, but it's built on fear. Break that fear, show people they can fight back, and the whole thing starts to crumble. That's the theory, anyway, Zeb muttered. In practice, we're usually running for our lives while Star Destroyers hunt us. Kanan cleared his throat. Before we start planning operations, we need to address something important. Storm, your powers are incredible, but you don't understand the Force. That's dangerous, for you and for us. Storm turned to face him fully. I'm listening. The Force is. Kanan struggled for words. It's the energy that connects all living things. It flows through everything, binding the galaxy together. Those sensitive to it can feel other beings, sense danger before it happens, influence minds, move objects. The Jedi used it to maintain peace. The Sith use it to dominate and destroy. And you think I use it, Storm said. No, Kanan corrected carefully. I think you touch it somehow, but from outside. Like you're affecting the same systems the Force touches, but through a different mechanism. Does that make sense? Storm considered this. In my universe, we have mutants whose powers affect reality itself. My friend Jean Grey manipulates matter and energy at a fundamental level through telekinesis and telepathy. Another friend, Magneto, controls electromagnetic fields. My powers let me manipulate atmospheric conditions and weather patterns. We're all accessing natural forces, but through biological mutations rather than mystical energy. Maybe that's what the Force is, Sabine suggested. A biological mutation that some species have. These midichlorians the Jedi talked about, they're organisms in the blood that let you touch the Force, right, Kanan? That's the scientific explanation, yes. But there's more to it than biology. The Force has a will. A purpose. Light and dark sides that reflect philosophical choices about how to use power. Storm's eyes narrowed. Explain the dark side. Kanan exchanged a glance with Hera before continuing. The dark side is powered by passion, anger, fear, hatred. It offers quick power but corrupts the user. Makes them cruel, selfish, destructive. The Sith embrace it fully. The Inquisitors serve it. Even the Emperor himself is a dark side master, maybe the most powerful in galactic history. And the light side? Peace, serenity, selflessness. The Jedi used the light side to protect others, never for personal gain or aggression. They were guardians, not soldiers. Kanan's voice carried old pain. At least, that was the ideal. The reality was, more complicated. Storm walked closer to the map, her fingers passing through the holographic star systems. Where I come from, power is neutral. It's how you use it that matters. Lightning doesn't care if you're good or evil, it strikes based on physics. The same power that runs a hospital can electrocute a victim. The morality comes from choice, not from the power itself. The Force isn't that simple, Kanan insisted. Using anger, hatred, fear, those emotions literally change how the Force flows through you. They corrupt. I've seen good people fall to the dark side and become monsters. Then I'll be careful about my emotions, Storm said. But I won't accept that feeling anger at injustice makes me evil. I won't believe that passion for protecting others corrupts. My friend Wolverine taught me that controlled rage can be righteous. My mentor Professor Xavier taught me that peace without action is just complacency. That's a dangerous philosophy in a galaxy with the dark side, Kanan warned. Maybe, Storm acknowledged. Or maybe your binary thinking, light versus dark, Jedi versus Sith, is why you lost. In my experience, absolute rules create absolute failures. The X-Men survive because we're flexible, because we use whatever tools necessary while maintaining our core principles. Hera stepped between them before the philosophical debate could escalate. This is productive discussion, but right now we have practical concerns. Storm, regardless of whether you use the Force or not, you have abilities the Empire wants to control or destroy. That makes you a target. And it makes anyone around you a target too. I understand that, Storm said quietly. If my presence endangers civilians. It doesn't have to, Hera interrupted. If we're smart about this. The Empire expects you to hide or run. Instead, we use you as a visible symbol. You appear, strike Imperial military targets, then vanish before they can respond with overwhelming force. We make them chase shadows while accomplishing real objectives. Hit and run tactics, Storm said. The X-Men have used similar strategies against Sentinels. Exactly. And while the Empire focuses on hunting you, we conduct other operations they're too distracted to notice. Hera pulled up a local map of Lothal. There's an Imperial fuel depot here, in the industrial sector. Heavily guarded, but critical to their operations. If it were destroyed in a natural disaster. Storm saw where this was going. You want me to create a storm that destroys the depot? Can you? Sabine asked eagerly. Storm studied the tactical overlay. The depot was far from residential areas, surrounded by military installations. Destroying it would cripple Imperial operations for weeks without harming civilians. It was exactly the kind of target the X-Men would approve. I can create a lightning storm focused on that area, Storm confirmed. Enough strikes to ignite the fuel reserves and destroy the storage tanks. But it would be obviously unnatural, no weather pattern would target that specific location so precisely. That's the point, Hera said. We want the Empire to know you're working with us. It forces them to divert resources, to second-guess every atmospheric anomaly, to fear that you could strike anywhere at any time. Psychological warfare, Canon added. The Empire rules through fear. We turn that fear back on them. Storm felt the familiar weight of decision settling on her shoulders. The X-Men had debated these tactics endlessly. When was property destruction justified? How much damage was acceptable in pursuit of freedom? Where was the line between resistance and terrorism? But she'd also seen what happened when good people did nothing. She'd watched friends of humanity murder mutant children. She'd witnessed government sentinels massacre peaceful protesters. Sometimes the only moral choice was to break things that needed breaking. When do we strike? She asked. Hera smiled, a predator's expression. Tonight. The depot operates on 3 shifts. Between 0200 and 0300 local time, only skeleton crew is present. We get you within range, you unleash hell on their fuel reserves, and we extract before Imperial reinforcements arrive. I'll need line of sight to the target, Storm said. And clear sky above it. Can't call lightning through a roof. The depot is open-air storage, Sabine confirmed. Perfect target for your abilities. Storm looked at each of them in turn, Hera's determination, Canon's cautious hope, Sabine's eagerness, Zeb's aggressive approval. They were risking everything on her. On an outsider from another universe who'd been in this galaxy for barely 3 days. It reminded her of when the X-Men had first trusted her with a mission. When they'd believed she could be more than a scared girl who'd accidentally killed her own parents with her powers. When they'd shown her that her mutation could save lives instead of taking them. Then let's show the Empire what a storm goddess can do, Storm said quietly. Hera extended her hand again. To the rebellion. Storm clasped it firmly. To freedom. As they began planning the operation in detail, none of them noticed the ghost sensors registering a new contact entering the system. A single light freighter, unremarkable except for its passenger, a probe droid launched by Governor Price's intelligence network, programmed to follow any ship matching the ghost's profile. The Empire was learning. Adapting. And while Storm prepared to strike her first blow against tyranny in this new galaxy, forces were already moving to counter her. In the Corellian sector, Lord Vader reviewed reports from Lothal with cold interest. Then he issued orders to his fleet. The executor would arrive at Lothal within 5 days. The industrial sector of Capital City never truly slept, but at 0237 local time it came as close as it ever would. Shift changes left critical minutes where security patrols overlapped poorly, where tired workers focused more on getting home than watching sensors, where the Empire's machinery of oppression ran on autopilot. Storm floated 2 kilometers above the fuel depot, invisible against the night sky, her body temperature precisely matched to the surrounding air to defeat thermal scanners. Below her, massive storage tanks held enough Tibanna gas and refined starship fuel to power a small fleet. The Ghost hovered 3 clicks to the east, sensors dark, waiting for her signal. She'd spent the last hour studying the depot's layout, counting guards, memorizing patrol patterns. 14 stormtroopers on duty. 2 AT-ST walkers positioned at the perimeter. No civilians anywhere within the blast radius. Hera had confirmed that 3 times. This was a purely military target. Storm closed her eyes and reached out with her senses, feeling the planet's atmospheric system spread before her awareness like a vast, living map. Lothal's weather was damaged, broken by industrial pollution and ecological devastation. But it still responded to her touch, eager almost, as if grateful for direction from someone who understood its fundamental nature. She'd been careful these past 3 days. Careful not to summon storms that would harm farmers or refugees. Careful to pull moisture from areas that could spare it. Careful to rebuild what the Empire had broken, one gentle rain shower at a time in the grasslands surrounding Kothal. Tonight, she would not be gentle. Storm's eyes snapped open, blazing pure white. Her consciousness expanded outward, touching air molecules hundreds of kilometers away. She pulled moisture from the distant sea, channeling it through pressure systems she created from nothing. She warmed air here, cooled it there, creating thermal differentials that spawned winds of unnatural precision. Above the fuel depot, clouds boiled into existence with impossible speed. Not the slow natural accumulation of a normal storm, but instant materialization, water vapor flash condensing around particles of dust and pollution that Storm positioned with surgical precision. Within 90 seconds, a thunderhead formation that should have taken hours to develop hung directly over Imperial property. On the ground, a stormtrooper glanced upward nervously. "Command, we're showing rapid weather development over the depot. Should we?" Lightning struck. Not one bolt, but a barrage, 37 simultaneous strikes that turned night into day. Storm had calculated every angle, every target. Each lightning bolt found Tibanna storage tanks, fuel conduits, power transformers. The electrical discharge ignited refined starship fuel in cascading explosions that ripped through the depot like a chain of detonating stars. The shockwave reached Storm even at her altitude, a wall of superheated air that she parted with casual wind manipulation. Below, the depot had transformed into an inferno. Secondary explosions tore through storage facilities. Tibanna gas ignited with distinctive blue-green flames that shot 200 meters into the air. The AT-ST walkers scrambled for cover as burning debris rained down around them. Storm monitored every second, her heightened senses tracking heat signatures. The stormtroopers were retreating to safe positions. Good. She'd given them time to run, deliberately striking the depot's far side first to drive personnel away from the main explosions. No one was dying here tonight, just expensive Imperial property being reduced to twisted metal and ash. She pulled rein from her storm, precise and controlled, dousing flames that threatened to spread beyond the depot's perimeter. Let the Empire's fuel burn, but not the city around it. Not the homes of people who hadn't chosen this war. Ghost, target destroyed, Storm said into the comlink Sabine had given her. Extracting now. Copy that, Storm. Hera's voice crackled with barely suppressed satisfaction. We're reading multiple Imperial response units scrambling from the garrison. Suggest you make yourself scarce. Storm smiled despite herself. Making herself scarce was the last thing she intended to do. She descended rapidly, dropping through her own storm clouds to hover 200 meters above the burning depot. Below, stormtroopers were organizing firefighting efforts while officers screamed into comlinks for reinforcements. She could see their confusion, their fear. They'd been trained to fight insurgents with blasters and thermal detonators. Not weather itself. Storm raised her arms, and the thunder answered. Not the natural rumble of distant lightning, but a directed shockwave of sound that boomed across the industrial sector. When she spoke, her voice carried on winds she'd specifically shaped to amplify and project her words across kilometers. People of Lothal, Storm's voice rolled across the city like divine proclamation. The Empire believes it controls this world. That its might cannot be challenged. That you must submit or die. She pulled more lightning from the clouds, letting it dance between her fingers, making herself impossible to miss against the burning backdrop below. I am Aurora Monroe. I am called Storm. And I tell you that the Empire is not invincible. That tyranny can be fought. That the forces of nature themselves stand against oppression. In homes across Capital City, thousands of people rushed to windows and rooftops, staring at the figure hovering in the storm, outlined by lightning, speaking with the voice of thunder itself. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Others wept. And in the hidden corners where resistance fighters gathered in secret, people began to hope. This is not the last time the storm will strike. Wherever the Empire crushes the innocent, I will be there. Wherever they exploit and destroy, I will bring the fury of the heavens down upon them. Below, Governor Price watched through the viewport of her command center, her face twisted with rage. Shoot her down. Now. Ma'am, she's out of range of conventional weapons, and our TIE fighters are grounded for scheduled maintenance. Then get them UN grounded. Price snarled. I want that woman dead or captured, and I want it done now. But Storm was already moving, carried on winds that accelerated her past the speed of sound. The sonic boom of her passage shattered windows in the industrial sector as she streaked eastward toward the Ghost's position, leaving only dissipating clouds and burning Imperial property in her wake. She landed on the Ghost's ramp just as Hera punched the throttle, and the freighter shot into the night sky like a startled bird. Sabine whooped with joy, Zeb laughed his booming laugh, and even Kanan allowed himself a slight smile. That was incredible. Sabine grabbed Storm's shoulders. Did you see the way those storage tanks just, she made an explosion gesture with her hands. And then you gave that speech. Everyone in Capital City heard it. Everyone. Storm leaned against the bulkhead, suddenly exhausted. Creating storms was one thing. Doing it with that level of precision while maintaining flight, amplifying her voice, and monitoring for civilian casualties had pushed even her considerable abilities. Did anyone die? She asked quietly. Hera checked her sensors. Imperial casualty reports show injuries only. Mostly burns and concussive trauma from the explosions. Your lightning strikes were surgical, you hit exactly what you needed to hit and nothing else. Storm nodded, relief washing over her. Good. That's good. Though I'm not sure about that speech, Kanan said carefully. You made yourself a very visible target. The Empire won't rest until they capture or kill you now. They were already hunting me, Storm pointed out. At least now I've given people hope. And hope is worth the risk. Maybe, Kanan conceded. But you also used religious imagery, the goddess, the voice of heaven, divine judgment. That's dangerous. People will start worshipping you, expecting miracles you can't deliver. Storm met his gaze steadily. When I was a child in Kenya, my parents died in a building collapse. I was trapped in the rubble with their bodies for days, developing claustrophobia that haunts me still. When I finally escaped, my mutant powers manifested. I wandered the Serengeti, confused and terrified, until I reached a village suffering from drought. She paused, remembering. I called rain without understanding what I was doing. The village celebrated me as a goddess, Aurora, mistress of the elements. They worshipped me. Fed me. Protected me. And I learned that being worshipped is a burden as much as a blessing. Because when the crop still failed despite my rain, when the lions still took a child despite my lightning, they looked at me with disappointment. With accusation. With the knowledge that their goddess was fallible. So why invoke that imagery again? Hera asked. Because people don't follow reasoned arguments or tactical analysis, Storm said quietly. They follow symbols. Stories. The illusion of divine power backing their cause. Professor Xavier understood that. Why do you think the X-Men wore costumes? We could have fought in street clothes. But the symbols mattered. They gave people something to believe in. She looked at each of them in turn. I won't lie to these people. Won't claim to be truly divine. But if they need to believe a goddess fights on their side to find courage, if that belief makes them resist rather than submit, then I'll bear that burden again. Because hope, even false hope, is better than despair. The Ghost's crew was silent for a long moment. Finally, Zeb spoke. That's pretty heavy stuff for someone who claims she just makes it rain. Storm actually laughed. Making it rain is the easy part. Leading people. That's always been the hardest thing I do. Then you understand what you've started tonight, Hera said seriously. Every act of resistance will be credited to you now. Every imperial reprisal will be blamed on you. You've made yourself the symbol of this rebellion, whether you intended to or not. I know, Storm said. The X-Men prepared me for that responsibility. The question is whether you're ready for what comes next. Because if the Empire was interested in me before, they'll be obsessed now. And that means everyone around me becomes a target. We were targets before you arrived, Sabine pointed out. At least now we have a storm goddess on our side. Don't call me that, Storm said, but there was no heat in it. I'm just Ororo. Just someone trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. Aren't we all? Cannon murmured. The Ghost broke atmosphere, leaving Lothal behind as they headed for the rendezvous point with the wider rebel cell. Below, in Capital City, the fuel depot burned for another 3 hours before Imperial firefighters finally contained the blaze. The damage assessment would take days. The propaganda impact would take much longer. And in the hidden corners of Lothal, in refugee camps and underground meeting places, in homes where families whispered after dark, a new name was being spoken with reverence and wonder. Storm. The goddess who returned. The Weather Witch. The Empire's reckoning made flesh. By morning, every Imperial intelligence network on the planet had been mobilized to hunt her. Every sensor station was calibrated to detect atmospheric anomalies. Every patrol was briefed on engagement protocols for a force sensitive with weather manipulation abilities. Governor Price sent an urgent message to Imperial Center, requesting immediate reinforcements and authorization to use any necessary force to eliminate the threat. And in the Corellian sector, Lord Vader read the reports with cold fascination. A woman who commanded storms. Who spoke with the voice of thunder. Who had already inspired dangerous hope among Imperial subjects. The Executor's course was locked in. Arrival at Lothal, 4 days, 17 hours. Vader turned from the viewport, his breathing apparatus hissing in the silence of his meditation chamber. He'd hunted Jedi Masters across the galaxy. Destroyed entire resistance cells. Crushed rebellions before they could spark. This storm would be no different. Powerful, yes. Inspiring, certainly. But ultimately mortal, ultimately fallible. He would break her. And in breaking her, he would crush the hope she represented. The Emperor had taught him well, symbols could inspire, but broken symbols inspired only despair. And Darth Vader excelled at breaking things. The hidden rebel base was little more than repurposed caves in Lothal's northern Badlands, but to Storm it felt uncomfortably like home. The X-Mansion's sub-basements had that same quality, walls of stone pressing in, limited ventilation, the constant awareness of tons of earth overhead. Her claustrophobia whispered warnings that she forced herself to ignore. She'd survived worse. Commander Jun Sato stood before a holographic display showing Imperial troop movements across Lothal, his weathered face grave. Around him, 24 rebel operatives, humans, Twi'leks, a few species Storm didn't recognize, watched with expressions ranging from hope to skepticism. The fuel depot strike was a significant victory, Sato said, gesturing at the display. Imperial operations have been crippled. 3-star destroyers that were scheduled to depart Lothal have been grounded awaiting refueling. That's a week, possibly 2, of disrupted operations. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Storm stood near the back, deliberately keeping a low profile despite being the center of attention. Let them see her as part of the team, not as some elevated figure above them. However, Sato continued, and the murmurs died. The Empire has responded with predictable brutality. They've increased garrison strength in capital city by 40%. Instituted martial law in the industrial sectors. And worst of all, he pulled up footage that made Storm's blood run cold. Stormtroopers dragging families from their homes in Kothal, the village where Morad lived. The refugees who'd helped her, given her information, shown her kindness. They're arresting anyone suspected of aiding the Weather Witch, Sato said bitterly. Collective punishment for the entire settlement. Standard Imperial tactics, make the people suffer for resistance, turn them against those who fight. Storm's hands clenched into fists. Lightning crackled between her fingers unconsciously, drawing startled looks from nearby rebels. How many? She asked quietly. 73 arrests so far, Hera answered, moving to stand beside her. They're being held at the Imperial garrison, awaiting interrogation. Torture, you mean? Storm said flatly. Yes, Hera confirmed. The Empire doesn't interrogate gently. Storm turned to Sato. Then we free them. Immediately. It's not that simple, Sato began. It's exactly that simple, Storm interrupted, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned commanding the X-Men. I struck the Empire. They're punishing innocents in retaliation. That makes their imprisonment my responsibility. A responsibility you can't fulfill with a suicide mission, Canon interjected. The garrison is the most heavily fortified position on Lothal. AT-AT walkers, anti-aircraft batteries, full company of stormtroopers. Even with your abilities, you can't just storm it. Watch me, Storm said, turning toward the exit. Sabine stepped into her path. Wait. Just, wait. You're right that we need to free them. But Canon's right too. Going in without a plan gets them killed along with us. Storm forced herself to stop, to breathe, to think tactically rather than emotionally. Professor Xavier had taught her better than this. Wolverine had drilled it into her head, rage without strategy gets you dead, darlin'. Use your head first, claws second. You're right, Storm admitted. I'm sorry. I'm just angry, Zeb supplied. Good. Angry is useful if you channel it right. The garrison is designed to repel frontal assault, Hera said, pulling up tactical data. But it wasn't designed to handle someone who controls weather. If we're smart about this. She highlighted the garrison's power systems. They rely on external generators for secondary power. The main reactor is shielded, but the backup systems are vulnerable to electrical surge. I can overload them with lightning strikes, Storm confirmed. Cause cascading failures throughout the facility. While they're dealing with that chaos, we infiltrate through the maintenance tunnels, Sabine added, tracing routes on the hologram. Free the prisoners, extract through the vehicle bay. The Empire will pursue, Sato warned. You'll have every TIE fighter on the planet hunting you. Then I'll give them something else to worry about, Storm said. Her eyes began to glow. How well do TIE fighters handle Category 5 hurricanes? Cannon shook his head. Those TIEs have pilots. Living beings. You said you wouldn't kill casually. I won't kill them, Storm replied. But I can ground them. Strip away visibility, create wind shear that makes flight impossible. Force them to land or crash, their choice. Most will choose landing. Most, Canon repeated meaningfully. Storm met his gaze steadily. I can't save everyone, Canon. I learned that lesson the hard way. But I can save the 73 people currently being tortured because they showed me kindness. And I will. With or without rebel support. The room fell silent. Finally, Sato nodded. Then we do this properly. Coordinated strike, maximum efficiency, 0 unnecessary casualties. Storm, you'll need to time your weather manipulation precisely. If you unleash a hurricane before we've extracted the prisoners. I understand, Storm said. I'll create electrical disruptions first. Once you signal extraction complete, I'll summon the storm. You'll have a 10-minute window to escape before conditions become impossible. 10 minutes, Hera repeated. That's tight. It's what I can give you, Storm said. My abilities are vast, but even I can't maintain a Category 5 hurricane indefinitely while fighting off Imperial forces. Sabine grinned. 10 minutes is plenty. We've done impossible things in less time. When do we strike? One of the other rebels asked. Storm looked at Sato, deferring to his command despite her personal urgency. This was their operation, their organization. She was the weapon they aimed, not the hand that aimed it. Dawn, Sato decided. 3 hours from now. The garrison operates on shifts, 0600 is changeover time. Guards will be distracted, tired. Perfect timing for maximum confusion. We'll need bypass codes for the detention block, Hera noted. Already obtained, another operative said, holding up a data chip. Cost us a significant bribe and one very nervous Imperial technician, but we have current access codes. Then we have a plan, Sato said. Team assignments, Hera, Sabine, Zeb, and Canon on infiltration. Storm provides external disruption and atmospheric cover. Secondary teams positioned at extraction points Alpha through Delta in case primary route is compromised. He looked at each of them in turn. This is dangerous. The Empire will respond with overwhelming force. If captured, you know what happens: interrogation, torture, execution. Anyone who wants to opt out, now's the time. No one moved. Storm felt a swell of respect for these people. They weren't superheroes with incredible powers. They were ordinary beings risking everything for a cause they believed in. Like the human allies of the X-Men, Moira MacTaggart, Sharon Xavier, the countless brave souls who stood with mutants despite having no powers themselves. Then we prepare, Sato said. Dismissed. And may the Force be with you all. As the group dispersed to ready equipment and review plans, Canon approached Storm. Can I show you something? She followed him to a quieter corner of the base, where he produced a small device from his pocket, a holocron, he called it. When activated, it projected the image of a Jedi in traditional robes. This is Master Luminara Unduli, Canon said quietly. One of the greatest Jedi of the Old Republic. She taught that power without wisdom leads to ruin. That even the mightiest Force user needs guidance and restraint. Are you saying I lack wisdom? Storm asked, not hostile, merely curious. I'm saying you're powerful enough to reshape this world's climate, Canon replied. But power at that scale comes with consequences. The Jedi Order fell partly because we became too powerful, too involved in galactic affairs. We stopped being guardians and became soldiers. And it destroyed us. Storm studied the hologram thoughtfully. The X-Men struggle with similar questions. How much should we intervene? When does protection become control? Where's the line between helping and imposing our will? Did you find answers? We found balance, Storm said. We protect but don't dominate. We fight but don't conquer. We inspire but don't rule. It's imperfect, but it's what we have. She looked at Kanan directly. I won't become your new Jedi Order, if that's what worries you. I won't try to remake this galaxy in my image. But I also won't stand idle while people suffer. Even if helping them draws more Imperial attention. Makes things worse in the long run. Especially then, Storm said firmly. Because the alternative is letting fear of consequences prevent all action. That's how tyranny wins, by making resistance seem futile, by making the cost of fighting appear greater than the cost of submission. Kanan deactivated the holocron. You sound like my master. He believed the same thing. It got him killed. I'm sorry, Storm said sincerely. Losing a mentor is. I can't imagine. Professor Xavier is still alive in my universe, but I've lost friends. Students. People who believed in the dream and died for it. Does it get easier? Kanan asked quietly. No, Storm admitted. But you learn to carry it. To honor their sacrifice by continuing the fight they started. Your master's death wasn't meaningless, Kanan. You're still here. Still fighting. That's his legacy. They stood in companionable silence for a moment. Then Kanan smiled slightly. You know, for someone from another universe, you understand us pretty well. Pain and loss transcend universes, Storm said. So does hope. And apparently, so does the struggle against tyranny. Come on, Kanan said, starting back toward the main chamber. We should prep for the mission. And Storm. Thanks for coming to Lothal. I know it wasn't your choice, but I'm glad you're here. So am I, Storm realized. As much as I want to go home, as much as I miss my team, there's something right about this. Like maybe I was meant to be here, at least for a while. The Force works in mysterious ways, Kanan said. So does fate, Storm replied. Or luck. Or random quantum fluctuations. Call it what you want, I'm here, and I'm going to make it count. They rejoined the others, finalizing details for the garrison assault. Storm spent the time meditating, centering herself, reaching out to Lothal's wounded atmosphere and preparing it for the fury she would soon unleash. 3 hours until dawn. 3 hours until 73 innocent people would either be freed or die in the attempt. Storm had faced worse odds. Had fought more powerful enemies. But something about this mission felt different. More personal. These people had helped her when she was lost and afraid. They'd given her kindness when they owed her nothing. She would not let the Empire make them suffer for that kindness. As the first hints of dawn began lightening the eastern sky, the rebel team moved out. The Ghost lifted off silently, running dark, heading toward Capital City and the garrison that held innocent prisoners. And above them, unnoticed by anyone on Lothal, 3 Star Destroyers dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Admiral Constantine had arrived early with reinforcements. The Empire was marshalling its strength. But so was the Storm. The Imperial garrison squatted in Capital City's military district like a metallic tumor, all sharp angles, gun-grade durasteel, and the arrogant geometry of Imperial architecture. Spotlights swept the perimeter in predictable patterns. AT-AT walkers stood sentinel at each corner, their massive legs locked in standby mode. Guard towers bristled with automated defense systems calibrated to detect approaching ships, ground vehicles, or infantry formations. They weren't calibrated to detect weather. Storm hovered 3 kilometers above the garrison, her body temperature matched to the surrounding air, her position chosen to exploit a blind spot in the installation's sensor coverage. Below, she could see the Ghost approaching from the south, flying low between buildings, using the city's terrain to mask its approach. Dawn was breaking, golden light spilling across Lothal's polluted sky, turning industrial smoke into rivers of amber and rose. Storm found it beautiful despite the ugliness beneath. Even wounded worlds had moments of grace. "Storm, we're in position," Hera's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Awaiting your signal." Storm closed her eyes and reached out, her consciousness expanding to touch the atmospheric system surrounding Capital City. She felt morning thermals rising from sun-warmed structures, felt the prevailing winds carrying factory smoke eastward, felt moisture in the air left over from yesterday's distant rainstorm. All of it answered her will. Beginning disruption in 3, 2, 1. Storm's eyes snapped open, blazing white. Her hands rose, fingers splayed, and the sky obeyed. Lightning struck the garrison's northern generator array, not one bolt but 7 simultaneous strikes that overwhelmed the facility's surge protectors in a cascade of electrical failure. Backup systems automatically engaged, rerouting power, but Storm was already targeting them. More lightning, surgically precise, frying transformer stations and overloading distribution nodes. Inside the garrison, lights flickered. Emergency alarms began wailing. Technicians scrambled to diagnose the impossible, a lightning storm that was targeting their infrastructure with impossible accuracy. "What in the—" an Imperial officer stared at his console in disbelief. "Lightning doesn't strike like that. It's hitting every backup system sequentially." "It's her," another officer said grimly. "The Weather Witch. She's here." In the detention block, stormtroopers rushed to manual protocols as electronic locks failed. But Hera and her team were already in the maintenance tunnels, moving fast through corridors that smelled of recycled air and Imperial efficiency. Sabine worked the stolen access codes at a junction point. "Codes are good. We're through." They emerged in a service corridor just as another lightning strike plunged the entire section into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in, dim red glow that cast everything in hellish shadows. "Move," Cannon urged, lightsaber ignited but held low to avoid drawing attention. Its blue glow provided additional light as they navigated toward the detention cells. Above, Storm continued her assault. She could feel the garrison's defensive systems coming online, automated anti-aircraft batteries swiveling toward her position. She smiled grimly. Let them try. Wind became a shield, deflecting targeting lasers before they could lock on. When the batteries finally fired, their shots went wide, fooled by atmospheric refraction Storm created around herself. To their sensors, she appeared 300 meters from her actual position. "Target is evading fire," a gunner reported frantically. She's doing something to the air. Our targeting computers can't compensate. Switch to manual targeting," his commander ordered. But Storm was already moving, carried on hurricane winds that accelerated her past supersonic speed. She circled the garrison like an orbital weapon, calling lightning strikes with each pass. Generator stations exploded. Communication arrays melted. Vehicle bay doors locked shut as their hydraulic systems fried. Below, the Ghost team reached the detention block. Zeb took point, his immense strength making short work of the 2 guards who tried to resist. Storm heard the brief exchange over comms: professional, efficient, no unnecessary violence. Just unconscious stormtroopers in open cells. "We've got the prisoners," Hera reported. 73 souls, all alive. Some injured but mobile. "Beginning extraction now." "Acknowledged," Storm replied, her voice tight with concentration. "You have your 10 minutes. Starting, now." She descended rapidly, dropping through 2,000 meters in seconds to hover directly above the garrison's parade ground. Stormtroopers scattered, blaster fire lancing upward ineffectually. Storm didn't return fire, didn't need to. She was here to make a statement. Her arms spread wide, and the sky above Capital City darkened as if a switch had been thrown. Clouds boiled into existence, not the gentle formations of natural weather, but towering cumulonimbus thunderheads that rose 15 kilometers into the atmosphere in less than a minute. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as cold fronts clashed with warm air masses Storm had positioned with surgical precision. Thunder rolled across the city like divine fury. Citizens stopped mid-stride, staring upward at impossible meteorological formations that spiraled around the garrison like the fingers of an enormous hand. People of Lothal, Storm's amplified voice boomed across the city. The Empire has imprisoned the innocent. Punished those whose only crime was showing kindness. They believe fear will make you submit. Lightning struck in a perfect circle around the garrison, 20 bolts simultaneously earthing themselves, creating a ring of scorched duracrete and thunder that shook buildings to their foundations. I tell you that fear works both ways. Let the Empire fear the storm. Let them fear that their cruelty will be answered with nature's fury. Let them fear that they are not invincible. In the governor's tower, Price watched the spectacle with cold rage. Where are Admiral Constantine's reinforcements? Entering atmosphere now, Governor, her aide reported. 3-star destroyers deploying TIE fighter wings. Estimated 2 minutes until they're in engagement range. Price's lips curled into a predatory smile. Then our weather witch is about to learn what real Imperial might looks like. Order the fighters to capture her if possible. Kill her if not. I want this symbol of rebellion erased. Above Capital City, Storm felt the massive ships breaking atmosphere, each 1 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, disgorging dozens of TIE fighters like angry insects from a disturbed hive. She'd faced Sentinel fleets before, faced alien warships and cosmic threats. But the sheer scale of Imperial hardware was sobering. 72 TIE fighters were screaming toward her position. She had maybe 90 seconds before they arrived. And somewhere below, Hera's team was still extracting prisoners through hostile territory. Storm reached deeper into her power than she'd gone since arriving in this galaxy. She felt Lothal's entire atmospheric system spread before her awareness, every wind current, every pressure gradient, every molecule of water vapor suspended in the air. And she pulled it all together with desperate urgency. The hurricane that erupted around Capital City was biblical in scale. Winds that had been strong became catastrophic, 300 km/h gusts that tore scaffolding from buildings and sent unsecured equipment tumbling through streets like lethal projectiles. The carefully organized storm clouds became a swirling vortex 10 kilometers across, rotating around Storm herself as the calm eye. Rain began falling, not gentle droplets but horizontal sheets of water driven by winds that could strip paint from durasteel. Visibility dropped to less than 50 meters. And through it all, lightning danced in continuous displays of electrical fury that turned day into strobing nightmare. The TIE fighters hit the storm wall and immediately began experiencing difficulties. I can't see anything. One pilot screamed into his comm, instruments are going haywire, wind shear is off the scale. Maintain formation. Their squadron leader ordered. Push through to. His transmission cut off as a lightning bolt found his fighter's solar panel, frying its systems instantly. The TIE tumbled out of control, spinning through the storm until its automatic emergency systems deployed, a small repulsor chute that would lower it roughly but survivably to the ground. Storm had designed this specifically. The lightning disabled but didn't destroy. The winds were devastating but predictable enough that skilled pilots could ride them down rather than crashing fatally. She was giving them every chance to survive. But survival meant retreating or landing. Either way, it meant not shooting at her team. Ghost, status. Storm called, her voice strained from the effort of maintaining this much atmospheric manipulation. We're through the vehicle bay. Hera reported over the howling wind. Prisoners secured, heading for extraction point Beta. We need maybe 2 more minutes. You've got it, Storm promised, though she wasn't sure she could maintain this level of power much longer. Every second was pushing her abilities to their limit. Sweat poured down her face despite the cold winds. Her muscles trembled with exertion. But she would not falter. Not while her team needed her. Another wave of TIE fighters tried pushing through the hurricane, and Storm showed them why that was a mistake. She created focused wind tunnels, tight spirals of 350-kilometer winds that spun individual fighters like tops. Pilots ejected or fought for control, but none of them got within weapons range of the ground extraction point. On the Star Destroyers above, Admiral Constantine watched his fighter wings being systematically neutralized by weather. By a single individual. His tactical mind recognized the genius of it. She wasn't trying to destroy Imperial forces, just ground them, delay them. Which meant she was protecting something. Or someone. Scan for rebel ships, he ordered. She's providing cover for an operation. Find it. But the storm interfered with sensors, turned tracking systems into useless static. By the time Imperial forces penetrated the meteorological chaos to locate the ghost, Hera had already broken atmosphere, jumping to hyperspace with 73 freed prisoners aboard. Storm felt their escape through the Force, or whatever connection existed between her powers and that mystical energy. Relief washed over her, and she began allowing the hurricane to dissipate. Not suddenly, which would create dangerous pressure differentials, but gradually. Winds decreasing from catastrophic to merely severe. Rain lightning from deluge to downpour. She'd done it. Mission accomplished. Now she just needed to escape herself. Storm shot upward through her own storm, riding winds she controlled toward the upper atmosphere. Behind her, Capital City emerged from the meteorological assault looking like a war zone, flooded streets, damaged buildings, disabled military vehicles scattered across the garrison parade ground. But no corpses. No civilians crushed by her power. Just expensive Imperial damage and humiliated military forces. She broke atmosphere just as the ghost's coordinates came through her earpiece. Coordinates received. On my way. But before she could orient herself, something struck her from behind, not a physical blow, but a wave of malevolent pressure that felt like drowning in oil. Storm tumbled through space, her concentration broken, her weather manipulation ending abruptly. A ship had been waiting in orbit. Not a star destroyer. Something smaller but infinitely more threatening. A sleek Imperial shuttle flanked by TIE advanced fighters. And standing on the shuttle's extended boarding ramp, held in place by the Force alone, was a figure in black armor that Storm recognized from rebel briefings. Darth Vader had arrived early. His mechanical breathing carried across the calm frequencies, a sound like death itself taking long, patient breaths. Impressive display, Vader's deep voice rumbled. But your powers end where the atmosphere does. And here, in the void, you are merely mortal. Storm tried to summon winds, but there was no air in space. Tried to call lightning, but electrical discharge in vacuum was useless. For the first time since arriving in this galaxy, she was completely vulnerable. Vader raised one hand, and Storm felt invisible fingers close around her throat. The Force choke. She'd been warned about this. She fought it. Not with power but with pure willpower, the same way she'd resisted telepathic control from Shadow King and the Brood. Her mutation gave her incredible mental resilience. But this wasn't telepathy. This was something else, something that bypassed her defenses and gripped her with malevolent intent. You will surrender, Vader commanded. Or you will die in the void. Choose quickly. My patience is limited. Storm's vision began darkening at the edges. She had perhaps 15 seconds of consciousness left. No air. No atmosphere. No way to use her powers. But she wasn't helpless. Storm had spent years training with Wolverine, learning hand-to-hand combat. She'd mastered fighting techniques from a dozen cultures. And she'd learned one critical lesson. When facing overwhelming power, change the rules of engagement. She stopped fighting the Force choke and instead shot ice from her hands. Ice formed from the moisture in her own body, expelled through her mutation in a technique Iceman had taught her. The crystalline projectiles flew at Vader with deadly speed. The Sith Lord casually deflected them with the Force, but it broke his concentration for just a second. Just long enough for Storm to gulp a desperate breath from the thin bubble of air she'd been maintaining around herself. And then the ghost erupted from hyperspace directly between Storm and Vader's ship, its deflector shields blazing. Grab her, Zeb. Hera's voice crackled over comms. The cargo bay opened, and Zeb's massive arm extended, catching Storm as she flew toward the ship. She tumbled into the bay, gasping, as the Ghost's shields absorbed fire from Vader's escort fighters. "Punch it!" Zeb shouted. The Ghost's hyperdrive engaged, and they vanished into the safety of hyperspace, leaving Vader standing on his shuttle's ramp, his mechanical breathing the only sound in the sudden silence. Inside his helmet, Vader's eyes narrowed. This Storm was powerful, resourceful, and far more dangerous than initial reports suggested. But she'd shown him her limitations. Shown him that she needed atmosphere to function. Shown him that she could be caught, could be killed. Next time, he would be ready. And there would be a next time. The Ghost drifted in deep space, running silent between star systems where no Imperial patrols ventured. In the medical bay, Storm sat on an exam table while Hera checked her for injuries. Her throat was bruised where Vader's force choke had gripped her, purple-black marks that would take days to fade. "You cut that rescue pretty close," Storm said hoarsely. "We jumped back the moment we confirmed the prisoners were secure," Hera replied, applying Bacta gel to the bruising. "Kanan felt something through the Force, said Vader had arrived early and was hunting you. We couldn't let him take you." Storm touched her throat gingerly. "He would have killed me if you hadn't intervened." In space, without atmosphere, she shook her head. "I was completely helpless." "Now you know his tactics," Kanan said from the doorway. "Vader's smart. He analyzed your abilities and found the one environment where they're useless. Next time I don't go into space without a ship," Storm finished. "Lesson learned." She slid off the exam table, testing her balance. Her body ached from the exertion of creating that hurricane, from the oxygen deprivation of Vader's attack. But she'd survived worse. The important thing was that 73 innocent people were free. "Where are the prisoners?" Storm asked. "Safe houses across 3 systems," Hera said. "We've already started relocating them. Morad sends his thanks, by the way. Said you kept your promise to the people of Kothal." Storm smiled despite the pain. "Good. That's good." She made her way to the common area where the Ghost's crew had gathered. Sabine was reviewing footage of the garrison assault, Zeb was cleaning his bow rifle, and the freed prisoners, those who'd chosen to join the rebellion rather than relocate, sat in small groups, speaking in quiet, odd tones. One of them, a young Twi'lek woman, approached Storm hesitantly. "You're really her. The goddess Storm." "Just Storm," she corrected gently. "And I'm no goddess. Just someone with abilities trying to use them properly." "You saved us," the woman said, tears streaming down her face. "They were going to execute us tomorrow. Make an example. And you came for us anyway, even knowing the Empire would throw everything at you." Storm took the woman's hands. "No one should suffer for showing kindness. What the Empire did to you was evil. Fighting evil is what I do." "Then you really are a goddess," the woman whispered. "Because only the divine would risk so much for strangers." Before Storm could respond, alarms shrieked throughout the ship. Hera rushed to the cockpit, Storm close behind. "What is it?" Storm demanded. "Imperial tracking beacon," Hera said grimly, her fingers flying over controls. "Someone on board is transmitting our location." The crew exchanged shocked looks. "A spy. An Imperial agent among the freed prisoners." "Find them," Kanan said, his hand moving to his lightsaber. "Now." Zeb and Sabine moved through the ship systematically, scanning each prisoner with a handheld detector. It took less than 5 minutes to identify the source, an older human man Storm recognized from the detention cells. He sat calmly as they surrounded him, making no attempt to flee. "Why?" Storm asked quietly. The man met her gaze steadily. "Because the Empire is order. Stability. Everything the Republic failed to provide. You call yourselves freedom fighters, but you're just terrorists prolonging a war that's already lost. The Emperor brought peace to a fractured galaxy. Peace through fear, Canon said. Through slavery and oppression. Through strength, the man countered. The strong survive. The weak submit or die. That's the natural order. Storm felt lightning crackling around her fingers. And the innocent people imprisoned with you? The families torn apart? The world strip-mined and poisoned? That's your natural order. Acceptable losses for galactic stability, the man said without emotion. The Emperor understands what people like you refuse to accept, that true peace requires absolute control. Your rebellion only creates chaos and suffering. Storm started to respond, but Hera cut her off. It doesn't matter. The beacon's been transmitting for 20 minutes. The Empire knows our location and vector. We need to jump immediately. Too late, Sabine said, checking sensors. 4 star destroyers dropping out of hyperspace. Distance, 1,200 kilometers and closing. They triangulated our position, Canon realized. Vader knew we'd rescue the prisoners. He planted this spy knowing we'd bring him aboard and lead them straight to our fleet. Storm's eyes blazed white. Then they used us. Used those innocent people as bait. Smart tactics, the spy said calmly. The Empire plays a long game. Your emotional rescue operation just exposed your entire cell's location. Well done, Goddess. Zeb grabbed the man by his collar. Should have let you rot in that cell. Zeb, secure him in the holding compartment, Hera ordered. Everyone else, prepare for emergency jump. We need to warn the fleet and scatter before. Too late for that too, Sabine interrupted. They're already here. Through the viewport, Storm saw them emerging from hyperspace, not just the 4-star destroyers, but dozens of Imperial frigates, TIE fighter carriers, and assault transports. A full battle group positioned to trap the scattered rebel fleet. And at the center, larger than any vessel Storm had ever seen, hung the Executor, Vader's personal superstar destroyer, 19 kilometers of Imperial firepower that made the other capital ships look like children's toys. By the Force, Canon whispered. He brought an entire sector fleet. Across open communications frequencies, Vader's voice boomed. Rebel vessels. You are surrounded and outgunned. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Resistance is futile. Your Storm cannot save you in the void. Storm watched rebel ships scrambling, trying to organize a defense against overwhelming odds. She saw a small corvette take a direct hit from a turbolaser, saw escape pods launching from disabled vessels, saw TIE fighters swarming like locusts toward defenseless transports. We have to help them, Storm said. How? Hera demanded. You said yourself you're helpless in space. Storm's mind raced, analyzing the tactical situation with the strategic skills Professor Xavier had taught her. Vader was right, her weather powers were useless in vacuum. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd assumed that was her only ability. Get me to that asteroid field, Storm said, pointing at a cluster of rocks 3,000 kilometers distant. The one with the icy planetesimals. What are you planning? Canon asked. Water ice is just frozen water, Storm explained rapidly. If I can reach those asteroids, I can sublimate the ice, turn it directly from solid to gas. Create an expanding cloud of water vapor in space. That's still useless, Sabine protested. Water vapor in vacuum just dissipates. Unless something holds it together, Storm interrupted. Unless I manipulate the electromagnetic fields to contain it, to create a localized atmosphere pocket. It won't be stable for long, but it doesn't need to be. I just need enough atmosphere to summon one lightning storm. One massive electrical discharge that will overload sensors and disable targeting systems across the Imperial fleet. The crew stared at her. Finally, Hera grinned. That's insane. That's genius, Sabine corrected. If it works, we'll have maybe 30 seconds of total sensor blindness. Enough time for the fleet to scatter and jump to hyperspace. If it doesn't work, we'll have led the Empire straight to you for nothing, Cannon warned. Then let's make sure it works, Storm said. Hera punched the throttle, sending the Ghost screaming toward the asteroid field at maximum sublight speed. Behind them, 3 TIE fighters broke formation to pursue. We've got company, Zeb announced. I'll handle them, Storm said. She moved to the cargo bay, Zeb opening the outer door despite the vacuum beyond. Storm stood at the edge, held in place only by the artificial gravity, and focused her abilities. There was trace atmosphere here, hydrogen atoms, solar wind particles, the thin molecular soup that existed even in empty space. Storm reached for those molecules, manipulating their electromagnetic properties to create friction, heat, pressure. The effect was subtle but enough. The pursuing TIE fighters suddenly found their instruments reading impossible energy signatures. Their targeting computers began throwing errors. And when they fired, their laser bolts curved away from the Ghost, deflected by electromagnetic field Storm was projecting. She's bending space around us. One pilot reported frantically. Weapons can't get lock. Impossible, his squadron leader replied. No force technique can. His transmission cut off as Storm created a localized electromagnetic pulse, a burst of energy that fried the TIE's unshielded electronics. The fighter went dead, drifting helplessly as its pilot struggled with manual controls. Storm repeated the process with the other 2 pursuers, then collapsed against the cargo bay wall, breathing hard. That took a lot out of me. But it worked, Zeb said admiringly. You just disabled 3 TIE fighters with space magic. Electromagnetic manipulation, Storm corrected. Not magic. Science. Sure, Zeb said. Space magic. The Ghost entered the asteroid field, weaving between tumbling rocks with Hera's expert piloting. Storm could feel the ice in these asteroids, millions of tons of frozen water, remnants from this system's formation. Perfect for what she needed. Get me close to the largest one, Storm instructed. Within 50 meters. Hera complied, bringing the Ghost alongside a planetesimal 300 meters across, mostly silicate rock, but with a substantial ice cap at one pole. Storm extended her hands toward it and pulled. Her mutation let her control water in all its forms. She reached into the ice, feeling its molecular structure, and began exciting those molecules. Heating them not through fire but through electromagnetic manipulation, forcing them to break their crystalline bonds and sublimate directly from solid to gas. The asteroid began venting, huge plumes of water vapor erupting from its surface as Storm converted tons of ice into gas in seconds. The vapor expanded rapidly in the vacuum, forming a growing cloud that Storm immediately began manipulating, using electromagnetic fields to contain it, to prevent its dissipation. Within 90 seconds, she'd created an atmosphere pocket 10 kilometers across, thin, unstable, but with enough molecular density to conduct electricity. Now, Storm gasped, exhausted. While it holds. She reached into the vapor cloud with her consciousness, feeling it respond to her will. Created temperature differentials. Generated ionic separation. Built up electrical potential the way storm clouds naturally did on planets, but here, in space, through sheer force of her mutation. And then she released it. Lightning erupted in space, not the normal impossibility of electrical discharge in vacuum, but genuine plasma arcs jumping between charged regions of Storm's artificial atmosphere. Billions of volts channeled through gas molecules, creating an electromagnetic storm that radiated outward at light speed. The effect on the Imperial fleet was devastating. Sensors across 4 star destroyers, dozens of smaller vessels, and hundreds of TIE fighters simultaneously overloaded. Targeting computers crashed. Communication systems went haywire. For 30 precious seconds, the most sophisticated military technology in the galaxy was reduced to useless static. All rebel ships, jump now. Commander Sato's voice cut through the chaos. Random vectors, emergency protocols. Go, go, go. One by one, rebel vessels vanished into hyperspace. Some jumped to predetermined coordinates, others to random locations they'd calculate later. The important thing was escaping before Imperial systems came back online. The Ghost was among the last to jump, Hera waiting until every other rebel ship had escaped. As they engaged the hyperdrive, Storm caught one final glimpse through the viewport, Vader's flagship hanging against the stars, its sensor arrays sparking with overload damage. Then they were in hyperspace, safe in that impossible tunnel between realities, leaving Vader and his fleet behind. Storm collapsed on the cargo bay floor, completely spent. Creating that atmospheric pocket had pushed her abilities beyond anything she'd attempted before. Every muscle trembled. Her head pounded. But they'd done it. They'd saved the fleet. Kanan knelt beside her. That was incredible. I've never seen anyone manipulate the Force like that, converting matter, creating weather in vacuum. Not the Force, Storm whispered. Just mutation. Just me. Maybe they're the same thing, Kanan suggested. Maybe your mutation is just another way of touching what we call the Force. Storm didn't have energy to debate philosophy. She just closed her eyes and let exhaustion claim her. Behind them, in the asteroid field, Darth Vader stood on the bridge of the Executor, watching sensor technicians scramble to restore systems. His breathing was the only sound in the sudden silence. Report, he demanded. All rebel vessels escaped, Lord Vader, an admiral said nervously. The electromagnetic pulse disabled our tracking systems before we could prevent their jumps. Vader said nothing for a long moment. Then, impressive. She adapted her abilities to an environment where they should not function. Found a weakness in our tactics and exploited it brilliantly. Shall we pursue, my lord? No, Vader said quietly. Let her run. Let her believe she's won. But now I understand her capabilities more completely. Her power requires atmosphere, but she can create atmosphere even in space given sufficient resources. Next time, we deny her those resources. Next time, we ensure she has nothing to work with. He turned from the viewport, his cape swirling. Prepare a full tactical analysis. Prepare a full tactical analysis. I want to know every limitation of her abilities, every possible countermeasure. And contact Governor Price on Lothal. Tell her to implement Protocol 17. My lord, the Admiral said hesitantly, Protocol 17 involves mass civilian detention and collective punishment. I know what it involves, Vader interrupted coldly. This storm fights for the innocent. Protects the weak. We will use that compassion against her. Draw her into a trap she cannot resist because her morality will not allow her to abandon those who need her. And when we've trapped her. Vader's mechanical breathing filled the silence. Then I will break her. And when the galaxy sees their goddess crushed beneath imperial might, the symbol she represents will die with her. Hope is a fragile thing, Admiral. And I excel at destroying fragile things. In hyperspace, Storm slept, unaware of the trap being laid. Unaware that Vader had already identified her greatest strength and was preparing to turn it into her ultimate weakness. The Empire was learning. Adapting. And the Storm was about to face its greatest test. 3 days after the fleet's escape, Storm stood alone on a barren moon orbiting a dead world in the Outer Rim, meditating as the Ghost underwent repairs at a hidden rebel shipyard. The silence here was profound, no wind because there was no atmosphere, no life because nothing could survive in this harsh environment. Just Storm, suspended in a protective bubble of air she maintained around herself, floating above lifeless regolith. She needed this. Needed the quiet to process everything that had happened since her arrival in this galaxy. The battles, the narrow escapes, the constant pressure of being a symbol for people she barely knew. Back home, she had the X-Men. Had Storm support network, Jean's telepathic comfort, Professor Xavier's wisdom. Here, she was alone with her power and her choices. Her comm unit chirped, Hera's voice cutting through her meditation. Storm, we're receiving a priority transmission from Lothal. You need to hear this. Storm sighed and created wind currents to carry her back toward the Ghost's landing site. Within minutes she was aboard, standing before a holographic display showing Governor Price's face. Attention, rebel insurgents and the criminal known as Storm, Price's recorded message began. Your recent acts of terrorism have demonstrated contempt for imperial law and order. Therefore, effective immediately, the Empire is implementing enhanced security protocols across Lothal. The hologram shifted to show capital city's main plaza. Storm's breath caught in her throat. Thousands of civilians, men, women, children, were corralled in the plaza by stormtroopers. Not arrested, not imprisoned. Just gathered, held at gunpoint, surrounded by AT-ST walkers and heavy weapons emplacements. 10,000 citizens of Lothal will remain in Imperial custody, Price continued. They will be held without food or water until the terrorist Storm surrenders herself to Imperial justice. For every day she remains free, 100 civilians will be executed. For every Imperial facility she attacks, 1,000 civilians will be executed. The choice is hers. The message ended. The hologram dissolved into static. Storm felt ice forming around her hands involuntarily, frost spreading across the Ghost's deck as her fury manifested physically. They're using innocents as hostages. Thousands of them. It's a trap, Kanan said quietly. Obviously a trap. Vader knows you won't abandon them. He's counting on your compassion to draw you in. Then he's counting correctly, Storm replied, her voice dangerously calm. I won't let 10,000 people die because the Empire wants me. If you surrender, they'll kill you, Hera protested. Execute you publicly to break the rebellion's morale. And then they'll probably kill the hostages anyway, you know the Empire doesn't negotiate in good faith. I'm not suggesting negotiation, Storm said. Her eyes began glowing white. I'm suggesting we save them. How? Sabine demanded. The plaza is surrounded by the entire capital city garrison. AT-ATS, turbolaser towers, anti-aircraft batteries. Even with your powers, you can't fight through that kind of firepower. Not directly, Storm agreed. She pulled up a holographic map of capital city, her strategic mind, honed by years of X-Men tactical planning, analyzing the terrain. But the Empire made a mistake. They're holding the hostages in an open plaza. Exposed to the sky. To atmosphere. To weather. Understanding dawned on Kanan's face. You're going to create a storm so massive that extraction becomes possible in the chaos. More than that, Storm said. I'm going to create a storm so devastating that the Empire has to choose between maintaining their hostage situation and protecting their own forces. And while they're making that choice, we evacuate the civilians. That's insane, Zeb said. Even for you, that's insane. Do you have a better plan? Storm asked. Silence answered her. Then we do this my way, Storm said firmly. But I need a team on the ground. Extraction specialists who can organize 10,000 panicked civilians and get them out while the Empire is distracted. We can rally the Lothal resistance cells, Hera said slowly. Get maybe 200 fighters positioned around the plaza. Set up evacuation routes through the underground aqueducts that the Empire doesn't know about. 200 fighters against the full garrison, Sabine said. Plus whatever reinforcements Vader brings. We won't be fighting the garrison, Storm corrected. I will. Your job is just evacuation. Get as many civilians out as possible before the Empire realizes what's happening. Kanan stepped closer, his expression troubled. Storm, the kind of storm you're describing, to create that much chaos, that much destruction, people will die. Imperial soldiers, yes, but still people. Can you live with that? Storm met his gaze steadily, and for a moment he saw the full weight of her experiences, the battles fought, the lives taken, the impossible choices made in defense of the innocent. I've killed before, she said quietly. Never casually, never without cause. But when the only choice is between letting innocents die or stopping those who would murder them, I choose to stop the murderers. Every time. Even if it costs me sleep. Even if it haunts me. Because the alternative is letting evil win through my inaction. That's the dark side talking, Kanan warned. That's how the Sith justify atrocities, by claiming noble intentions. No, Storm said firmly. The Sith kill for power, for dominance, for selfish gain. I kill only when there's no other way to protect the innocent. That's not the dark side. That's just war. And war is ugly no matter how noble your cause. She looked at each of them in turn. I'm doing this. With or without rebel support. Those people are hostages because of me. I won't abandon them to save myself or to maintain some philosophical purity about never taking life. But if the rebellion can't support this operation, I understand. I'll go alone. Hera was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. We're with you. We'll mobilize every resistance fighter on Lothal. Prep evacuation routes. Coordinate with local sympathizers to have emergency supplies and medical support ready. I'll contact Commander Sato, Kanan added. Request any available ships for orbital extraction once you've created your opening. And I'm going in with the ground teams, Sabine said. Someone needs to document this. Show the galaxy what the Empire does when it's desperate. Storm felt gratitude wash over her. Thank you. All of you. I know this isn't the clean, simple victory anyone wants. There are no clean victories against the Empire, Zeb interrupted. Just messy ones where we try to minimize the damage. You're doing your best. That's all anyone can do. When do we strike? Hera asked. Storm checked the chronometer. The hostages have been held for 6 hours already. No food, no water, exposed to the elements. The Empire wants them suffering, wants footage of their misery to break morale. We hit them at dawn, 18 hours from now. Gives us time to position forces and lets the hostages survive the night. Dawn, Hera confirmed. We'll be ready. As the crew dispersed to begin preparations, Kanan remained. Storm. That thing you said about war being ugly? About taking lives to protect innocents? My master taught me the same thing. The Jedi preached absolute nonviolence, but sometimes the only way to stop evil is through controlled violence. I just want you to know, you're not wrong. And you're not alone in carrying that burden. Storm smiled sadly. Thank you, Kanan. That means more than you know. 18 hours later, Storm hovered 5 kilometers above Capital City as the first light of dawn touched Lothal's polluted sky. Below her, 10,000 hostages huddled in the plaza, watched by 500 stormtroopers and supported by heavy armor. Around the plaza's perimeter, she could sense the rebel extraction teams in position, small groups armed with nothing more than determination and escape routes memorized. This was it. The moment where she would either save thousands or fail spectacularly. Storm closed her eyes and reached out with her consciousness, touching Lothal's atmosphere in ways she'd never attempted before. Not just creating a storm, but building one so massive, so powerful, that it would literally reshape the city's local climate. She pulled moisture from the seas 500 kilometers distant. Drew cold air masses from Lothal's polar regions. Created thermal differentials by heating the air above Capital City to 40 degrees Celsius while keeping the surrounding areas near freezing. The physics were impossible by natural standards, but Storm had long ago learned that her mutation didn't care about natural limitations. Within 10 minutes, clouds were forming. Within 20, a supercell thunderstorm 10 kilometers high hung directly over Capital City. And Storm had only just begun. She layered storm systems on top of each other, 3 separate weather patterns rotating in opposite directions, creating wind shear that would birth tornadoes. She supersaturated the air with moisture, creating conditions for horizontal rain that would reduce visibility to 0. She positioned multiple mesocyclones, rotating updrafts that would drop hail the size of human fists. And through it all, she prepared the lightning. Not the surgical strikes she'd used before, but a continuous barrage. Hundreds of bolts per minute. An electrical storm that would overload every sensor, disable every electronic system, create so much chaos that organized response would be impossible. On the ground, Governor Price stared upward in horror as impossible weather formations appeared overhead. What is she doing? Creating a Category 6 hurricane, her meteorologist reported, his voice shaking. Except Category 6 doesn't exist. The scale stops at 5. This is beyond measurement. Evacuate the garrison, Price ordered. All personnel to shelter immediately. Governor, what about the hostages? Price hesitated for 1 fatal second. Then, maintain positions. The hostages are our leverage. That's when the storm struck. Lightning fell like rain, 200 simultaneous strikes that turned the plaza into a hellscape of thunder and electrical discharge. Stormtroopers scattered, their electronic systems fried, their formation broken instantly. The AT-ST walkers tried to move, but wind gusts of 400 km per hour knocked them over like toys. And then the tornadoes touched down. Storm had shaped them precisely, narrow funnels that carved paths through Imperial positions without touching the huddled civilians. She guided each one with microscopic adjustments to wind patterns, using them as surgical tools to destroy military hardware while sparing innocent lives. Go! Hera's voice screamed over the comms. All extraction teams, move now. 200 rebel fighters rushed into the plaza from a dozen different entry points, shepherding civilians toward the underground aqueducts. Most of the hostages were too shocked to resist, too terrified by the apocalyptic weather to do anything but follow the people shouting directions. Storm maintained her position above the city, her consciousness spread across the entire storm system, feeling every wind current, every pressure gradient, every electrical discharge. She was the storm now, her awareness merged with the massive weather system she'd created. And she felt when Vader arrived. The Dark Lord's shuttle descended through her storm as if the weather didn't exist, protected by deflector shields and piloted by someone who could sense danger through the Force. It landed on the garrison's command tower, and Vader emerged, his breathing apparatus the only sound louder than the wind. He looked up directly at Storm's position, though she was invisible behind clouds. And she felt his attention like a physical weight, malevolent, calculating, absolutely focused on her destruction. Impressive, Vader's voice boomed across calm frequencies. But ultimately futile. You cannot maintain this forever. And when you falter, I will be waiting. He was right, Storm realized with creeping horror. She'd been maintaining this storm for 15 minutes, and already exhaustion was setting in. Her muscles trembled. Her head pounded. The sheer scale of what she was doing, manipulating weather patterns across an entire city, guiding multiple tornado systems, calling continuous lightning, was pushing her mutation to its absolute limits. How much longer could she hold this? 20 minutes? 30? And the evacuation was barely half complete. Storm gritted her teeth and pulled deeper into her power than she'd ever gone before. She felt something shift inside her, not breaking, but transcending. The X-Men had always told her she held back, that she feared her own potential. Professor Xavier had theorized she could reshape entire planetary climates if she truly unleashed herself. Now, with 10,000 lives hanging in the balance, Storm stopped holding back. The storm intensified beyond anything meteorologically possible. Wind speeds exceeded 500 km per hour, faster than the most powerful tornadoes ever recorded. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in seconds as Storm pulled Arctic air masses directly over capital city, flash freezing rain into hail that hammered Imperial positions like artillery. But more than the physical effects, Storm felt herself merging with the storm on a fundamental level. Her consciousness didn't just control the weather, it became the weather. She was the lightning arcing between clouds. She was the wind screaming through streets. She was the pressure differential that spawned new tornadoes. And in that transcendent state, she sensed something she'd never felt before. The Force. Not as canon described it, some mystical energy binding the galaxy, but as a fundamental field of consciousness that permeated all living things. Her mutation had always connected her to Earth's biosphere. Here, in this moment of desperate need, that connection expanded to touch something deeper. Something universal. Storm wasn't using the Force. But she was finally understanding it. Extraction 60% complete, Hera reported over comms. But Imperial reinforcements are mobilizing. We need more time. Storm gave them time. She created a wall of tornadoes around the plaza, 7 rotating columns that prevented any ground forces from approaching. Lightning struck with such frequency that the thunder became continuous, a roar that made communication impossible without electronic assistance. On the command tower, Vader observed with cold fascination. This woman had broken through some barrier, accessed a level of power that rivaled Force Masters. But power without discipline was still vulnerable. He reached out through the Force, not to attack Storm directly, but to touch the civilians she was protecting. 10,000 minds, each one a tiny flame of fear and hope. He didn't need to snuff those flames, just nudge them toward panic. In the plaza, hostages who'd been following rebel directions suddenly screamed and scattered. Order dissolved into chaos as Vader's Force suggestion planted terror in susceptible minds. People trampled each other trying to reach exits. Children were separated from parents. The organized evacuation began collapsing. Storm felt it instantly, the surge of panic, the breaking formation. And she understood what Vader had done. He'd turned her compassion against her, created a situation where her power alone couldn't solve the problem. But Storm wasn't alone. Cannon, she called over comms. I need you in that plaza. Now. Counter his Force manipulation, calm the civilians. I can't match Vader's power. You don't need to match him, Storm interrupted. Just give them hope. Remind them they're not alone. That's what the Force is for, isn't it? Connection. Do that. Connect with them. In the plaza, Cannon ignited his lightsaber, the first time he'd revealed himself as a Jedi since Order 66. The blue blade cut through the Storm's darkness like a beacon. People of Lothal. His voice carried through the Force itself, touching minds directly. I am Kanan Jarrus, Jedi Knight. You are not abandoned. The Force is with you. And so am I. Follow the rebels to safety. Trust in hope. Trust in the light. The effect was immediate. Civilians who'd been panicking suddenly steadied. Parents found their children. The evacuation resumed with renewed organization. Vader's breathing quickened, not from exertion, but from realization. Another Jedi. One he'd missed. And worse, one who was using the light side to counter his dark side manipulation. Interesting, Vader murmured. He ignited his own lightsaber and leaped from the command tower, using the Force to carry him 300 meters through the storm toward the plaza. Storm saw him coming. Cannon, Vader's incoming. I know, Cannon replied calmly. I can feel him. Storm. Whatever happens next, get these people out. That's the mission. Nothing else matters. Cannon, don't. But he'd already cut the calm link. Storm watched helplessly from above as Darth Vader landed in the plaza, his red lightsaber blazing against Cannon's blue blade. They met in a clash of plasma and Force energy that sent shockwaves through the crowd. Cannon was skilled, years of survival had honed his abilities. But Vader was something else entirely. A master who'd hunted and killed dozens of Jedi. Every strike Kanan made, Vader countered effortlessly. Every force push, Vader absorbed or redirected. "You fight well," Vader said conversationally, as if they weren't dueling in the middle of a hurricane. "But you lack conviction. You hide your power, afraid of what you might become." "I've seen what power does," Kanan shot back, parrying a strike that would have taken his head. "I saw the Jedi fall because they became too powerful. Too involved. I won't repeat their mistakes." "Then you'll die with their weakness," Vader replied. He struck with devastating speed, a series of attacks that forced Kanan backward, separated him from the evacuating civilians. Storm felt the duel through her storm-merged consciousness, felt Kanan's life force flickering as Vader pressed his advantage. She had a choice. Maintain the storm and complete the evacuation, or abandon it to help Kanan. Save thousands or save one. It was no choice at all. Storm began descending, pulling a tornado with her like a living weapon aimed directly at Vader. But before she could strike, something unexpected happened. Kanan stopped defending. Stopped trying to win the duel. Instead, he opened himself completely to the Force, not drawing on it for combat, but channeling it outward. Toward the civilians. Toward Storm. Toward every living thing in Capital City. "The Force is with you," Kanan shouted, his voice amplified by the same power Vader wielded. "And I am one with the Force." The light that erupted from him was blinding, not physical light, but spiritual radiance that Storm could sense even through her storm consciousness. Kanan wasn't fighting Vader anymore. He was becoming a conduit for hope itself, pouring every ounce of his being into one final act of selfless protection. The evacuating civilians felt it. Felt sudden courage, sudden certainty that they would survive. They moved faster, more efficiently, helping each other with renewed purpose. The rebel extraction teams felt it. Felt their own fears dissolve, replaced by absolute commitment to the mission. And Storm felt it, felt Kanan's presence in the Force, in the storm, in the fundamental fabric of reality, telling her without words, "Finish this. Save them. My life for theirs. Worth it." Vader's lightsaber struck. Kanan didn't dodge. The blue blade fell from lifeless fingers as Kanan Jarrus collapsed, his body empty, his spirit released into the Force. "No." Storm's scream was thunder itself, a shockwave of sound and fury that shattered windows across the entire city. Her grief became the Storm's grief. Lightning struck in every direction, not targeted now, just raw electrical fury given form. Wind speeds doubled, then tripled. The temperature plummeted as Storm lost control of her careful manipulation and simply unleashed devastation. Vader raised his hand, using the Force to shield himself from the meteorological apocalypse. Even he took a step backward from the sheer intensity of Storm's unleashed power. "Impressive," he said to the corpse at his feet. "Your death has made her stronger. But strength without control is just chaos." He was wrong. Storm's fury wasn't chaos. It was focused rage, channeled through years of X-Men training and refined by Wolverine's combat philosophy. When someone you love falls, you make their death mean something. You fight harder. Smarter. You win. She didn't attack Vader directly, recognized that as futile while he could use the Force. Instead, Storm created a localized pressure differential directly over the command tower where Imperial leaders had gathered. She dropped the atmospheric pressure by 30% in less than 2 seconds. The effect was catastrophic. The tower's windows exploded outward. Officers collapsed with burst eardrums and rapid decompression injuries. Governor Price fell unconscious as the oxygen was literally pulled from her lungs. Extraction 95% complete. Hera's voice cut through Storm's grief. "Storm, we need to go. The civilians are safe." Storm wanted to stay. Wanted to drop every ounce of her fury on Vader until either he or she was dead. But Kanon's last message echoed in her consciousness: finish this. Save them. She pulled one last massive surge of power, not to attack, but to obscure. Flash freezing atmospheric moisture to create a fog bank so dense that thermal and optical sensors were equally useless. Behind that curtain, the last civilians and rebel fighters vanished into the underground aqueducts. Then storm shot upward, through her own storm, breaking atmosphere as rebel ships descended from orbit for final extraction. She tumbled into the Ghost's cargo bay, physically and emotionally spent, as Hera punched the hyperdrive. They jumped away from Lothal, leaving behind a capital city in ruins, an Imperial garrison in chaos, and one Jedi's body lying in an empty plaza. 3 days later, Storm stood in a rebel briefing room as Commander Sato presented the operation's results. 9,743 civilians successfully evacuated and relocated to safe systems. 257 casualties during the evacuation, mostly from the initial panic Vader induced. 17 rebel fighters killed in action. And one Jedi, who gave his life to complete the mission. The room was silent. Storm stared at the tactical display without seeing it. The Empire is calling it the Storm of Lothal, Sato continued. Their propaganda machine is spinning it as terrorist devastation. But the truth is spreading faster than their lies. Hollow footage of you rescuing 10,000 hostages. Of a Jedi revealing himself to protect innocents. Of the Empire using civilians as human shields. He paused. Public opinion is shifting. 17 systems have reported increased resistance activity. Recruitment into the rebellion has tripled in the Outer Rim. And for the first time since the Emperor's rise, people are openly speaking about hope. Sato looked directly at Storm. You did that. You and Kanon. You showed the galaxy that the Empire isn't invincible. That even their mightiest warriors can be challenged. Storm finally spoke, her voice hollow. Kanon died. That's what I did. Got a good man killed because I insisted on saving hostages I knew were bait. Kanon chose to reveal himself, Hera said quietly. Chose to stand as a Jedi one last time. Chose to give his life so others could live. That was his decision. His sacrifice. Don't dishonor it by claiming responsibility for his choices. She's right, Sabine added. Kanon died the way he wanted, as a Jedi, protecting innocence. He wouldn't want you carrying guilt for that. Storm nodded, but the grief remained. Another friend dead. Another life sacrificed in an endless war against oppression. How many more would die before this was over? What's your next move? Sato asked. Vader knows your capabilities now. He'll adapt his tactics. And the Empire will be hunting you with renewed intensity. Storm thought about that. About Kanon's sacrifice. About 10,000 civilians who owed their lives to a plan that shouldn't have worked. About a galaxy desperate for symbols of hope. My next move, she said finally, is to find a way home. I'm not from this universe, and staying here indefinitely isn't sustainable. But while I'm searching for a way back, I'll keep fighting. Keep being the symbol these people need. Keep showing the Empire that their reign of fear isn't absolute. She looked at each of them in turn, the Ghost's crew, the rebel commanders, the freedom fighters who'd risked everything to save innocence. Kanon believed the Force was with me, Storm said quietly. I'm not sure I understand what that means. But I understand duty. I understand fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. And I understand that sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to keep living, keep fighting, keep hoping. Then you're staying with the rebellion? Commander Sato asked. Until I find a way home, yes. But on my terms. I won't become a weapon you point at targets. I won't kill casually or abandon my principles. I'll fight this war the way the X-Men taught me, defending the innocent, protecting the vulnerable, and never becoming the monsters we fight against. Hera extended her hand. Then welcome to the rebellion, Storm. For however long you're with us. Storm clasped her hand firmly. Thank you. For everything. For rescuing me from Vader. For trusting me with this mission. For being there when I needed allies. That's what we do, Zeb rumbled. Watch each other's backs. As the briefing concluded and people dispersed to their duties, Storm found herself alone on the observation deck, staring out at hyperspace's swirling tunnel. Somewhere out there, beyond this galaxy, the X-Men were probably searching for her. Professor Xavier would have the Cerebro running constantly, trying to locate her psychic signature across dimensional barriers. She hoped they knew she was alive. Hoped they understood she hadn't abandoned them by choice. But until she found a way home, she had work to do here. A war to fight. People to protect. And a fallen Jedi's legacy to honor. Storm closed her eyes and reached out with her senses, feeling the ship's recycled atmosphere, feeling the vast emptiness of hyperspace beyond the hull. Her powers were still there, vast, intimidating, barely controlled. But she was learning. Growing. Understanding what it meant to be both powerful and responsible. May the Force be with you, Kanan Jarrus, she whispered. And may your sacrifice inspire a galaxy to fight for freedom. Behind her, unheard and unseen, Kanan's Force presence flickered for just a moment, not a ghost, but an echo of approval. A final message from a Jedi who'd found his purpose in his last stand. Storm smiled despite her grief. She wasn't alone in this fight. Not really. The Force, whatever it truly was, connected her to everyone fighting for justice across this galaxy. And that connection gave her strength. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. And the Empire would learn what it truly meant to face nature's fury channeled through righteous anger. The legend of Storm spread across the galaxy like wildfire through a parched forest. In cantinas on Tatooine, smugglers whispered about the goddess who commanded lightning and rescued 10,000 souls from imperial tyranny. On Coruscant itself, even within the Empire's shining capital, citizens spoke in hushed tones about footage showing a Jedi's last stand and a storm that defied all natural law. Children on worlds the Empire had conquered drew pictures of a woman with white hair and glowing eyes, imagining a protector who might one day come to free them too. The Empire responded with predictable brutality. Propaganda broadcasts declared Storm a terrorist and Force criminal. Governor Price was quietly reassigned to a minor administrative post, punishment for her failure. Admiral Constantine faced execution but was spared only because Vader recognized the impossibility of the tactical situation his fleet had faced. And Darth Vader himself continued hunting, analyzing every sensor reading from their encounters, studying Storm's patterns and limitations with the patience of a predator who knew his prey couldn't run forever. But something had shifted in the galaxy's consciousness. For the first time since the Clone Wars ended, people spoke openly about resistance. Not whispered hopes in shadowed corners, but actual conversations about fighting back. The storm of Lothal proved what many had forgotten, that the Empire could be challenged. That even overwhelming military might had weaknesses. Storm herself remained with the rebellion, operating from hidden bases and appearing wherever imperial tyranny was most brutal. She liberated slave camps on Zygeria with hurricanes that disabled their security systems. She protected rebel convoys with fog banks that rendered imperial sensors useless. She became the galaxy's most wanted fugitive, and its most inspiring symbol of hope. But she never stopped searching for a way home. Every planet she visited, she sought out scholars and scientists, anyone who might understand dimensional travel or the rift that had brought her here. The answers remained elusive, lost in a galaxy that viewed such concepts as impossible fantasy. In the Ghost's common area, months after Lothal, Storm stood before a memorial hologram showing Kanan's face. She'd never known him long, but his sacrifice had taught her something crucial, that heroism wasn't about power or abilities. It was about choosing, in your darkest moment, to give everything for others. I hope I'm honoring your memory properly, she said to the hologram. The X-Men taught me to be a hero, but you taught me what that means in a galaxy at war. Thank you, Canon Jarrus. For believing in hope when darkness seemed absolute. Hera approached quietly. He'd be proud of what you're doing. Of what you've inspired. Would he? Storm asked. I've killed Imperial soldiers, Hera. Destroyed installations. Created storms that have inadvertently harmed innocents caught in the crossfire. Canon preached restraint. I'm not sure he'd approve of my methods. Canon preached balance, Hera corrected. Not passivity. He'd understand that fighting the Empire requires hard choices. And he'd see that you make those choices with conscience, not cruelty. That's what matters. Storm nodded slowly. I miss my home. My team. Professor Xavier's wisdom. Logan's brutal honesty. Jean's understanding. But I'm grateful for what I've found here. For you, for the rebellion, for the chance to matter in a galaxy that isn't mine. You do matter, Sabine said, entering with Zeb. The Empire's afraid of you. Actually afraid. And fear is the only language they understand. Zeb grinned. Plus, you're the only one who can make it rain on my birthday. Appreciate that, by the way. Storm laughed despite herself. I'll try to arrange clear skies next year. If you're still here next year, Sabine said carefully. Have you had any luck finding a way home? No, Storm admitted. But I won't stop looking. The X-Men need me. Earth needs me. And I need them, my family, my purpose, my world. She paused. But until I find that way home, I'll keep fighting here. Keep being the storm this galaxy needs. Hera activated a tactical display showing Imperial movements across dozens of systems. Then we have work to do. Intelligence reports the Empire is planning something big, Operation Cinder, they're calling it. Targeted devastation of rebel sympathetic worlds. Storm studied the display, her tactical mind already analyzing possibilities and strategies. Then we stop them. Like we've stopped them before. Together, Hera confirmed. Together, Storm agreed. Outside the ship, stars streamed past in hyperspace's impossible colors. Somewhere in that vast galaxy, Darth Vader prepared his next trap. Imperial forces mobilized to crush rebellion. And ordinary people looked to the sky, hoping to see storm clouds gathering as a sign that help was coming. Aurora Monroe had never asked to be a symbol. Never wanted the burden of inspiring a galaxy's hope. But the X-Men had taught her that with great power came great responsibility, and that responsibility didn't end just because the world had changed. She was Storm. Mistress of the elements. X-Man. And now, however temporarily, rebel. She would fight this empire with every storm she could summon, protect every innocent she could reach, and inspire every heart that dared to hope. And someday, when she finally found her way home, she would carry these lessons with her. Would remember a Jedi who gave everything for others. Would honor a galaxy that had accepted her not as an outsider, but as one of their own. The Force was with her, whether she fully understood it or not. And the storm was far from over.